Emily and Jason entered the orphanage just a few months apart. She was just under 7 at the time, and he had turned 8 the month before. Emily was raised by one mother, and when she died suddenly, the girl, for lack of relatives, was immediately placed in an orphanage. Jason had a completely different story, but with the same outcome. The boy was brought up in a prosperous family, was a late and long-awaited child. His parents literally lived for him, trying to make sure their son had everything. On his birthday, they decided to make Jason a gift and went the whole family to a neighboring town, where the Circus Shapito came. That day was amazing, full of impressions, and it seemed that nothing foreshadowed trouble. On the way back, they were enthusiastically discussing the performance when a van flew into their path. The driver, failing to control, rammed their car head-on. The parents were killed instantly before the doctors arrived. Jason suffered minor scratches and bruises. He lost consciousness from the impact and woke up in the hospital, not remembering how he got there. He had only one aunt who lived somewhere in the village. Guardianship immediately crossed her off the list of those who could take the boy, and she herself did not really want to do so, citing old age, illnesses, and a meager pension. She had even come to the orphanage a couple times after Jason's placement, but then her visit stopped. That's how Emily and Jason ended up in the orphanage. But their friendship didn't start right away. At first, they did not even know of each other's existence because they lived in different wings of the boarding school, and their studies rarely overlapped. But one day at recess, Jason noticed how a few boys grabbed the red-haired girl's notebook folder and started throwing it at each other, shouting hurtful teases. Jason didn't think twice and headed toward the bullies. He was the tallest of his classmates, and his father had been taking him to sports since he was 6. His whole appearance said that he could easily stand up for himself and others. "Now, hand over the folder quickly," he said menacingly as he stepped closer. Jason, seeing that they were in no hurry to do so, snatched the folder out of one of their hands and, handing it to the girl who was shrinking from fear, turned to the trio again. "All right, if I ever see her again or hear any insults, you'll be sorry as," if to confirm his words, he took the one who seemed to be the ringleader by the chest and shook him hard, hissing in his face, "Don't make me angry. I hope I don't have to do it again." He nodded quickly and, waving to his friends, disappeared with them into the back of the school hallway. Jason walked over to the girl. "Let me walk you where you were going, so no one else gets hurt. My name is Jason, by the way. What's yours?" With that, their friendship began. The boy tried to spend all his free time with Emily and try to appease anyone who tried to hurt her. But there weren't many of them, and those who did quickly realized that Emily is better to avoid. Growing up, they both did not even realize how their friendship grew into deeper and more sincere feelings. By the end of high school, the young people could not imagine life without each other. Jason simply adored his Carrot Top, as he affectionately called the girl, and she answered him with mutual love, saying that she could not live without him. In all the years since their acquaintance, they had never once quarreled. In the orphanage, no one even doubted that they would get married after they entered adulthood. After graduation, the director helped them to get a decent housing for a young family. Without his help, they would have gotten 2 one-bedroom apartments, and most likely, just rooms in a communal house. And so they were given the keys to a spacious 2-room apartment not far from the center. When they crossed the threshold of their first apartment, they stood holding their hands and holding their breath for 5 minutes. Then Jason suddenly picked Emily up in his arms and whirled her around the room. "We're free. We have our own house," he shouted enthusiastically. Emily laughed, tapped him playfully on the shoulder with her fist, and said, "You're crazy. Stop now. Do you hear? Put it down." Jason gave them some good things from the pantry, a mattress, a couple of pillows, and a blanket, saying, "This will save us for the first time, and then you'll earn money and buy whatever you want." That's how they lived for the first few months. Dinners, as Jason said, Japanese style, on the floor. In the evening, they had a mattress to sleep on, but none of that stopped them from loving each other and living happily ever after. They decided to get married a little later, when they could save up some money. "I just really want," Jason said, hugging Emily, "for us to have everything like people. Engagement rings, you have a veil and a beautiful white dress. So let's wait a little while." Emily was willing to wait as long as it took to be close. So she agreed without hesitation. After graduating from boarding school, she found a job pretty quickly, working in a small store as a sales clerk. Jason, on the other hand, had no luck. For 2 months, he'd been going out in the morning to look for work and always came back upset. Emily realized he'd gone out again for nothing, and she'd say to comfort her lover, "What are you worried about, my dear? Everything will be fine. You're my smart and hardworking. You will definitely find something. In the meantime, we'll live on my earnings." After a while, Jason went out in the late afternoon and came back in the morning. Emily felt uneasy, but he reassured her. "What are you thinking? I got a job as a security guard at a club. It's on the other side of town." She seemed to calm down, but it was unclear to her why the club paid different amounts each time. When he started bringing home some bags, she stopped sleeping altogether. She tried to talk to him and find out what was in them. But he waved her off and said, "Baby, what are you imagining? A colleague asked me to hold some things. He was either going to make repairs or give them to someone. I thought I'd let them stand. We've got plenty of space anyway." Emily was afraid to think of anything bad and kept believing these completely implausible excuses. It ended suddenly and quickly. One day, unable to stand it when Jason left to go to the store, she did look in one of the bags. What she'd been thinking all along was confirmed. There was jewelry, expensive items, watches, natural furs, and a goblet. Frightened, Emily quickly closed the bag and sat on a chair in the kitchen in confusion. She was scared. She realized that Jason had gotten himself into something very wrong, but she didn't know how to talk to him about it. When Jason returned from the store, he noticed the change in his beloved and immediately asked, "Honey, is something wrong? Are you pale and shivering?" Emily was preparing dinner, rattling the dishes, afraid to look him in the eye. Quietly, she said, "I'm fine. Just a little headache." Jason hugged her carefully and said in a tone that brooked no objection, "Okay, you're going to go lie down now, and I'll finish up. As soon as dinner's ready, I'll call you. Why don't you take a pill?" Emily nodded her head and went to her room. She hoped to figure out a way to talk to Jason about what she'd seen. She was so nervous and preoccupied with her thoughts that she didn't realize she'd dozed off. She was awakened by the insistent ringing of the doorbell. She got up and left the room. Jason stood in the hallway and whispered pleadingly, "Baby, don't open it, I beg you. It's for me. I'll explain everything to you later." There was so much terror in his eyes that Emily stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The harsh voice behind the door brought her back to reality, demanding she open voluntarily. Otherwise, it promised to break the door down. The rest was like a dream. She opened, let in 3 policemen who showed some papers. They snapped the handcuffs on Jason's wrists and began the search. Invited by the witnesses, the retired couple who lived across the street stared judgmentally at everything that was going on. They whispered quietly, and Emily couldn't believe that this was happening for real and not in a horrible dream. At the end of the search, one of the policemen said, "Your friend has stolen enough for both of you to do time." "Yes, yes, girl," as they say, "you'll go on a train, won't you?" So to speak. For complicity as an accomplice from that moment on, Emily's life was a nightmare, one that she blamed on Jason and didn't understand how he could do such a thing. Without even thinking about how many days had passed since the law had shown up at their house, Jason hadn't looked at Emily once. Already, as they were both being led away, he whispered, "I'm sorry, love. I wanted us to have money so you wouldn't need anything." The policeman, hearing this, grinned wryly and said, "Don't worry. Now for a few years she will definitely not need anything. The state will provide the chowder." Next came the interrogations, the cell, the trial. As it turned out, Jason had managed to break into several houses and apartments in a short time. He gave all the stolen goods to accomplices in pawn shops and saved the money in an account. In the courtroom, he said, "I wanted to save up for a nice wedding with a limousine and a restaurant. I also wanted a bigger apartment so we could have lots of kids and maybe a house. And a car, of course," he added. Emily sat silent, tears running down her cheeks. The lawyer required by law didn't try hard enough, and Jason got 5 years. Emily was given 2.5 years as an accessory after the fact. When she heard the sentence, she couldn't hold back. She burst into tears and turned to her recent lover and screamed, "I hate you. I hate you. You ruined our lives, you bastard," she sobbed. And Jason, with his arms around his head, swayed from side to side, as if trying to shut himself off from what was happening. As they left the courtroom, they didn't even look at each other. It would seem that the people who had recently fallen in love had become complete strangers in an instant. Emily was put in a cell, where there were already seen prisoners. From the first day, they did not miss a minute not to mock the quiet, modest orphanage. There were days when she was even afraid to sleep. At night, it seemed to her that she was sure to be killed, strangled, or stabbed. Emily couldn't understand why they hated her so much and made her life a living hell every day. And once they really almost took a girl's life, Emily didn't even have time to realize why. It all started with some absolutely insignificant altercation and ended with the fact that her cellmates threw her on the floor and began to beat her. The poor girl only had time to cover her head and face. If it hadn't been for the escort, her life might have ended there. It was Kevin who put in a good word for her, and after that day she was transferred to a quieter cell. Kevin began to show her all sorts of attention, interest, and care at every meeting. A couple of weeks after they met, he managed to arrange a date. It was short-lived, but the passion that erupted between them was mutual. Emily and Kevin began an affair. The girl, who had given up on her love life after Jason's betrayal, fell in love again and felt happy. "Amy, I love you so much," he whispered every time they met. "Kevin, I can't live without you anymore. As soon as you're free, we'll get married right away. You don't mind, do you?" Of course she was okay with it and really wanted a big family with lots of kids. Therefore, when she found out that she was pregnant, she almost jumped with delight. The girl was looking forward to another date to tell Kevin the happy news. But he didn't show up a day or two later. An elderly escort who had been on the same shift with him, seeing how nervous Emily was, found an opportunity and said, "You, my dear, don't wait for him. The doctor reported your pregnancy to her superiors. So Kevin's been given a choice: bond with you and be out of work in 24 hours or be transferred far away to another colony." He chose the latter. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. After all, he'd sworn his love, promised to marry. It seemed she'd been betrayed again. She tried to calm herself down for a while longer, hoping that things would calm down and Kevin would come over for a date. He might well have, but he didn't. Having been reprimanded for having an affair with an inmate, he decided not to risk his reputation anymore and cut Emily out of his life. A few weeks before the birth, the same elderly escort advised her to apply for parole. "You're in good standing here. And it's your first parole, God willing, and your last, and you'll have a child soon. Don't even think about it," Emily, not really believing it, nevertheless applied for parole a few days before the birth. She forgot about it while waiting for the birth. She gave birth to a daughter, and seeing her for the first time, felt happy. In spite of everything, the girl was very much like her as a child, and Emily was glad in her heart that it was her and not her father who had run away. When the daughter was a little over a month old, Emily was informed that her petition had been considered, and she was free. One thing she was happy about was having a roof over her head. She had a government-issued apartment. It was closed all this time, but she had to live on something. In the morning, someone from above decided to help the poor woman. When she took her daughter in her arms and went for a walk, she saw an announcement right at the entrance of the house. The office nearby required a cleaner. Without thinking, Emily immediately went to the address. Realizing that with such a background and a child in her arms, she could only get such a job, she decided to try her luck. In the personnel department, she was met by a friendly girl. After listening to what she came with, she sympathetically said, "No, sorry, we cannot take. Not only do you have a criminal record, but you also have a newborn baby. What are you doing home? Didn't you at least leave the kids behind when you came here?" Emily, barely holding back tears, replied, "I have no one to leave them with. I am from an orphanage. We have no relatives or friends. I beg you, give me a chance. You have cleaning in the evening. When there is no one here, I will come and put her somewhere and clean up. I can have her quietly sleeping for hours on end. I really need this job." The girl looked at her with pity and pain in her eyes. Then, after a moment's thought, said, "Sit down. I'll see if I can help you now." She quickly dialed a telephone number from memory. When the other end picked up, she said with a smile, "Hi, Susan, how are you doing? Though I know you always do fine. Tell me, did you say you needed a cleaning lady to clean the entrances?" After listening to her interlocutor, she laughed and continued, "No, I haven't gotten to that point yet, dear. My work suits me just fine. I want to help one person. Let me send her to you and you can talk and see." Hanging up the phone, she wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to Emily. "Here's the address. A friend of mine is the supervisor there," she began to explain. "Her name is Susan Johnson. Just where are you going to put the baby there? I don't know. I don't suppose you have a stroller." Emily, lowering her eyes, answered quietly, "No, but I'll think of something." The secretary sighed and said abruptly, "You know what? Come here tonight at 6. I live a couple houses down. You can sit on the bench and I'll bring out the stroller. It's half sitting, but the backrest reclines nicely. It's better than nothing. It's my daughter's. I was going to throw it out, so I'll get some more stuff together." This day seemed like the best day Emily had had in a long time. She'd gotten the job. The pay wasn't much, but she could take her daughter to work. Chloe, that was the name of the woman from the personnel department, brought out 2 bags of almost new baby clothes and a bust. Lastly, she suggested, "On your day off, also come again by evening. You're the same size as me. I think I can get you something." Emily was very grateful to Chloe. If it hadn't been for her, there was no telling how long the job search would have lasted. Now, every morning she went to work with her daughter. There was no clear schedule of time. The main thing was to get everything done during the day, and that was a big plus. Emily rocked the baby and, leaving the stroller on one of the floors, was engaged in cleaning. then transported to the next entrance and cleaned further. That way, while her daughter was sleeping, she could get everything done in 2 trips. Susan Johnson's boss couldn't get enough, and every time she met her, she said, "Well, I do not know how to thank Chloe for such a worker. Before you something, she had some drunks came, a day working, a week disappear. It was time for me to pick up a rag myself. I just feel sorry for Olivia. I'll see what I can do." A couple days later, while Emily was cleaning, she came in again and said cheerfully, "So, here goes. I've made an arrangement with a retired lady, Mrs. Thompson. She, while you're cleaning, will be taking the little girl to her place." Emily looked confused and said quietly, "But I won't have anything to pay with. I can barely make ends meet as it is." Susan Johnson smiled again and replied, "It's nothing. It's out of the goodness of her heart. Well, you can take her to the store or the drugstore when she needs it." From that day on, Emily left her daughter with Mrs. Thompson when she went to work, the sweetest grandmother, and thanked God for sending her such wonderful people. They hit it off right away. They were alike in some ways. They both had no family and survived as best they could. Mrs. Thompson's husband died 5 years ago, exactly a year after their only son died. When she talked about them, the woman always cried and said, "That's just the way it is. They're out there together now and I'm here alone. I beg God to let me go. But it seems that my hour has not yet come. So I must help you." Emily and her daughter began to visit Mrs. Thompson often, just for a visit. Emily would help around the house, running in, sometimes cooking something and going to the store. When the weather was nice, the 3 of them liked to take walks in the park, which was not far from the house. That's how the days flew by. As soon as her daughter turned 1.5 years old, the same Susan Johnson helped Emily put her daughter in the nursery, and she herself found a part-time job. "The work isn't hard. It pays even better," she said, dictating the address. "But I hope you'll still keep working for me." Emily immediately replied cheerfully, "Come on, Susan Johnson. How can we live on 1 paycheck? Thank you so much for everything now." In addition to cleaning the entrances, twice a day, morning and evening, she kept the beauty parlor in order. She tried to forget her prison past, but the local district officer reminded her of it every now and then. Emily, if she saw a policeman at her door, immediately understood there was another theft or robbery in their neighborhood. And in these cases, he always went to her first, no matter how she tried to explain that she now has a completely different life, a daughter, a job, and he visited them again and again. When the little girl turned 6, Olivia, once again on the doorstep of the district police officer, frightened, asked, "Mom, and why does the uncle comes to us?" Emily kissed her daughter and replied, "He's making sure no one hurts us. Run to your room. I'll tell him we're fine and he'll go away." When the door closed behind the girl, Emily whispered to the policeman, "Stephen, I beg you, don't ever make these inquiries in front of your daughter. I don't want her to know about my past." "She'll find out sooner or later," the man said sadly. "There aren't many people who are silent. So you'd better tell her where she was born and how you got there." As if apologizing, he added, Emily, I'm sorry to disturb you. I can see you're willing to go out of your way to make sure your daughter doesn't need anything. You're working around the clock. But my job is such, I must, in case of something like you, in the first place to visit." She understood perfectly well and walked Stephen and his tea to the door. As soon as he left, Olivia ran out into the hallway. "Mommy, let's go quickly," the little girl shouted excitedly. They're showing swimming. She'd been clinging to the TV since she was about 3 years old when the synchronized swimmers were on. After the end of the broadcast, almost every time with burning eyes said, "Mommy, will you put me in the pool? I will be as beautiful to perform." And you clap. Emily in response always promised, but that's where it ended. Once again, Olivia tearfully declared, "Mom, but why do you always just promise? I really want to swim, and all you keep saying is, okay, I'll write it down." That day, her daughter cried bitterly, and Emily decided to fulfill the promise by all means. In the morning, after taking her to the garden, she went to the swimming pool. It was 1 stop away from their house, and she quickly walked to the beautiful sports complex. In the foyer, a handsome young man came out to meet her, and after listening to Emily, smiling, he said, "You are lucky. You're just in time. We are just recruiting children of that age. Only our institution is private, and all classes are paid because they are held with a trainer. By the way, my name is Anthony, and I am the one who is recruiting this group." After finding out how much a class cost, Emily immediately paid for 1 month. That was enough money she had been saving for a rainy day on her way home from work. With the rest of the money, she went to the thrift store and bought her daughter a swim cap and swim cap. After picking Olivia up from daycare, Emily couldn't resist telling her the news. Her daughter stood stiffly, disbelieving what she had heard, and asked in a shaky voice, "Is it true?" "I'm going to swim." Emily took her daughter in her arms and kissing her, replied, "Of course, my good one. You will be the best at swimming." Unsure of it, she couldn't tell her daughter that her happiness would only last a month, and then she wouldn't be able to pay for the coach services. Emily decided she would give her daughter a little happiness, and then whatever happens from there. Olivia looked forward to her first class. All the evening before, she walked around the apartment in her bathing suit and cap. Her mom, laughing, asked, "Are you going to stay up tonight in that outfit?" The next morning was Saturday. Emily left work and took her daughter to the pool. Olivia looked around and squeezed her mom's hand tightly. The coach warned that parents could watch the children only by sitting on the benches near the walls, and Emily, putting her daughter under his control, stepped aside. The group was small, only about 10 kids of similar ages but completely different in appearance. Judging by the couple, it was noticeable that the mom had shelled out her last dime for this visit, just her. The others were clearly well off. After watching the coach treat each child in exactly the same way, she calmed down a bit. But just 5 minutes after the class started, 3 round as balls fatty began to interfere with him. He patiently tried to reason with them, but the boys kept talking loudly and pointing their fingers at him at will. "Beggars! What are you doing here?" "What garbage dump did you find that outfit in?" shouted one of them, laughing loudly. "A hat like a turtle in a swamp," echoed his friend. One of the moms squeamishly turned to Emily, speaking through gritted teeth. "They let everyone in. I hope your daughter doesn't get anything on our kids. Does she even have a certificate?" Emily tried to pretend she hadn't heard. She was willing to put up with anything for Olivia to swim. The coach couldn't hear the parents. They were on the other side of the pool. But he did try to keep the boys in line. He did it very tentatively, and only once. He knew exactly who the fat boys' parents were. All 3 were well-known businessmen in the city and had huge connections. And the moms were famous for their complicated personalities. If the coach tried to really calm down the little insolence, he would immediately find himself on the street. That wasn't exactly his plan. Emily, noticing that the boys were not on a joke, divided and tears appeared in her daughter's eyes, got up and approached the parents standing by the water. She had already realized that her kind had a designated place away from the pool itself, and that the rich could move freely, watching their offspring's progress right by the water. Emily, trying to keep her emotions in check, enunciating each word clearly, said, "Please calm your children down now, or I will not vouch for myself." The 2 ladies with manicured nails and eyelashes glanced over and laughed all over the pool. "Did you hear that?" One of them started talking. "I think that redneck is threatening us. I don't understand how she got here at all. We should write a complaint. I'm not going to put my son in the same group with that poor woman." Before anyone could realize it, Emily had jumped up and shoved them into the pool. There was silence for a second, and then chaos ensued. The scandalized women yelled loudly that they couldn't swim and tried to flounder like dogs. The children froze and watched in silence. Anthony rushed to their aid in his clothes and struggled to drag them both to the stairs. They had gone from arrogantly dressed ladies to shapeless wet creatures, more like toads. The hair sticking to their bodies revealed their far from perfect figures. The bellies of the ladies were like beer drinkers, which was not noticeable in the dry, loose clothing before. Having found themselves on dry land, instead of gratitude, they immediately began to curse the trainer. Already jumping out of the hall, one of the rescued yelled, "Can't you recruit normal people? Get out of here. You're fired. I'm going to the principal right now, and you can pack your bags." Emily looked at her frightened daughter and had only one regret, that her first class had ended before it had begun. Emily struggled to get the girl to change and go home, promising to come back someday. When she left the gymnasium, Emily saw Anthony sitting on a bench nearby. She realized that the detractors had gotten their way, and the guy had been fired. He was very upset. Emily decided to support him. "Don't worry," she said quietly as she came closer and added, "You'll definitely find another job. And please forgive me. I didn't think it would end this way. But I won't let my daughter get hurt either." Anthony looked at her sadly and replied, "Yes, I understand, but what does that have to do with me? I've always tried to treat all my children equally, avoiding conflict, and here you are. I also rushed to save these girls and I was fired for it." They talked for a long time while Olivia played passionately on the playground. When Emily got ready to go home, Anthony volunteered to walk them home. Then they chatted for a while longer in the driveway. At that moment, Emily caught herself thinking that she did not want to part with the young man. And he, as if sensing it, suddenly suggested, "Let's go for a walk tomorrow. We could all go to the park together, or to the movies." When Emily replied that she couldn't because she was working, he offered to meet her after work. She was ashamed to admit who and where she worked, So Emily offered to meet him at the daycare center where Olivia went. "We'll pick up the sheep at the same time," Emily said with a smile. Their meetings became a regular occurrence. Emily was always sure that Anthony would be there when she arrived. From the first day they met, she realized that this was the kind of man she wanted to be around. Anthony was caring, intelligent, courteous. Olivia had made contact with him from the first day, and they had become true friends. After a couple weeks of meetings like this, Emily decided to invite Anthony to visit. She promised herself that this evening she would tell him everything about herself. It was very hard for her to live a lie, and the truth would come out sooner or later. After dinner and putting Olivia to bed, they sat in the kitchen until 3 in the morning. It was hard for Emily to start a conversation, but she did. "Anthony, I really like you. I feel comfortable and good with you, but I have to tell you all about myself at once. I have deceived you. I'm not a saleswoman, although I might have wanted to be. But because of my past, I can't be anything but a cleaner." Lowering her eyes, afraid to look at Anthony, she told him everything she could. And he listened in silence. All this time he had not uttered a word, and when she was silent, he stood up and just hugged her, saying quietly, "Silly girl. Did you really think I'd just up and leave like that? I don't care what happened before. What matters is that I have you now. I want to always be there for you." My girls. Emily snuggled into his chest and felt relief for the first time in years. That same night, Anthony revealed that he had been married for 2 years, but then a great sorrow happened. His wife was hit by a drunk driver. She was 3 months pregnant at the time. "Just like that, before I could be a husband and become a father, I was widowed." Anthony sadly finished the story. The next morning they woke up together for the first time, hugged tightly, and promised each other not to part again. A couple days later, Anthony got a job and convinced Emily and her daughter to move in with him, and then convinced her to quit one job. "I make good money. We have enough. Washing entrances, it's hard work, which my beloved will definitely not do." With a serious look began to convince the man. "If you want to be independent so badly, you can keep cleaning the salon for now, and you should know that I don't like it." It was as if she didn't believe in her happiness until the end. She was afraid that in case of something she would not be able to get a job again. In case of what exactly she did not know, but she continued to work in the beauty salon. Looking at Anthony and Olivia's relationship, Emily often thought that this was the kind of father she would want for her daughter. He worried about making sure she had the best of everything, and when she was sick, he ran to the pharmacy on duty in the middle of the night to buy medicine. During the first days of summer, he said he remembered Olivia's dream and decided to teach her to swim. "We'll go to the river every weekend," he announced cheerfully over dinner. "I know a lovely spot. The current isn't strong there, but you have to make an effort to get over it. By the way, you can learn to swim much faster in such conditions than in a swimming pool." The girl's delight could not be conveyed in words. She threw herself around Anthony's neck and whispered, "You are the best. I really want you to be my daddy." "Oh, you what?" Emily tried to cut her off. Anthony sat the little girl on his lap and, smiling, said, "Why not? I, for one, would love to. Only Mommy would have to be asked if she would want a daddy like that for you." Emily smiled and, looking affectionately at Anthony, replied, "Sure, I'd love one." "Well, that's good then. Then we'll go to the registry office tomorrow and apply. In the meantime, girls, let's go to bed. It's getting late," Anthony summarized, and after kissing both of them, he headed for his room. The next morning, he begged the strict lady at the registry office to sign them as soon as possible, but she was adamant, strictly stating, "The laws and rules are the same for everyone." So the nearest free date was in a month and 3 days. Going outside, Anthony hugged Emily and said with a smile, "But that's okay, it won't change anything anymore. A month is not a year. It will fly by without you noticing. The main thing is that fate gave you to me, and all thanks to your trips to the pool with Olivia. Though I'm fine without that office, so it's all in the past." And it turned out, the scandal did not pass without a trace. The shame of the rich got on the cameras, which are placed throughout the sports complex to maintain order. Probably one of the guards took the most spectacular moment from the very beginning of the scandal. With wet clothes, dripping makeup, they looked monstrous. The whole scandal hit the net, and in a few days traveled its vast expanse. Rich scandalist Oak recognized on the streets and smiled wryly. After all, now it was clear what hides behind fashionable outfits, free cut and a thick layer of makeup. Angry ladies decided to take revenge on the coach from the pool and the beggar. Using their connections, they tracked them both down. And what was their surprise when it became known that Anthony and Emily have an affair? Just at this moment, the lovers were living their happy lives and were absorbed in preparations for the wedding, although they decided not to organize a lavish celebration. The evening for loved ones was still planned. Anthony's parents weren't there. They left one after another when he studied in the second year of the institute. His mother from a serious illness, and his father, not surviving this loss and loneliness, died in his sleep 6 months later. Anthony was left with one aunt who lived in the village, with whom he kept in touch. Herein decided to invite the only native person and a few friends, with whom he communicated since the school bench. Emily, in turn, wanted to see on this day Chloe, who helped her so much in a difficult time and continued to communicate with her. And of course, Mrs. Thompson, who had become practically a member of the family. A small but very cozy restaurant was booked. The rings were bought, and only the outfits remained. Emily was about to buy a dress at the weekend, but shyly asked Anthony, "Darling, can I go alone? After all, they say it's not good for the groom to see the dress before the wedding." He laughed, and winking at Olivia, replied, "You're right, my dear. Whatever you say. Olivia and I will go to the river then, because summer will be over soon, and she and I have big plans." Emily picked out an outfit rather quickly. It was a cream-colored, beaded floor-length dress. Olivia's dress was the same color with a puffy skirt with several layers. Satisfied and happy, Emily returned home, humming a tune she had heard somewhere. Mrs. Thompson began to prepare dinner. Suddenly, the phone rang. The woman listened silently to the person speaking and immediately answered excitedly, "I'll be right there. What's the address?" She quickly pulled herself together. Her mind was a mess. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. The police officer on the phone reported that Olivia had been found all alone, crying on the riverbank. Emily caught a cab and quickly made her way to the station, where her frightened daughter rushed toward her when she saw her, and burst into tears. "Mommy, Anthony drowned," she began to say through her tears. "I only turned my back for a few minutes. There were some flowers there. I wanted to pick some for you. I came back and he was drowned. Only his sneakers and clothes were left on the shore." The girl sobbed uncontrollably. Emily, having asked the policeman for water, began stroking her daughter's head and calming her down. "Oh, come now, silly girl. How can Anthony drown if he's a swimming coach?" With these words, she tried to calm not only her daughter but herself as well. She wanted to believe it was impossible. But the policeman said the facts were undeniable and Anthony was gone. All the way home, she tried to look away so as not to show her condition and emotions. "Mommy, don't cry," her daughter stroked her step. "I'm with you. I will always love you," she said like an adult. Her daughter's words made her calm down. During the day, Emily went to work on automatic while the little girl was at daycare. Then she'd pick her up and they'd walk home. Only when Olivia fell asleep did Emily let the tears flow. Once, when she fell asleep in the morning, she had a terrible dream. Her Anthony, alive and well, was sitting in some gray room. The room was tiny, windowless, stone-walled, and looked like a barn or a cellar. Emily felt the cold and damp as if it were real. She pulled the blanket over her head, even in her sleep. Anthony was saying something, and she hardly realized he was calling for help. She woke up in a cold sweat and wanted to forget the nightmare quickly. But the dream was so believable that she decided to go to the police. When Emily told about her assumptions, the duty officer, clearly unhappy with her arrival, asked, "Did your fiancé have any enemies?" "Well, or someone he was in a fight with." Emily immediately remembered that shortly before his disappearance, Anthony had told her how he had coincidentally met the women Emily had dumped in the pool. He'd laughed and said that they'd been ready to kill him, but he'd only grinned in response, which had pissed them off even more. Emily told about the conflict in the pool and the lady's threats of revenge. The policeman made it clear that he didn't want to get involved. To get involved in the squabbles of well-known businessmen in the city was clearly a way to get himself into trouble. Maybe if he had, he would have put it off. But this time Emily was in luck. Looking at the gray-haired man sitting at the next table, he took her application. It turned out that just at that time the department was undergoing an inspection, and it came because of a large number of unsolved cases. The police officer had to respond to her visit. The addresses of all the participants of that long-ago conflict were searched. They took into account all the real estate, formerly owned by the families, and in one of the cottages really found a cellar, where Anthony was found. Thin, overgrown with stubble, he could hardly get out. The owner of the house ingratiatingly excused himself to the police. "I didn't mean no harm. I just wanted to teach him a little lesson. You understand, I have nothing against him personally, but mine, as soon as she saw the video with his fall into the water on the internet, so mad. I bet she's been nagging me every day to find it. Well, you know, if a woman has something in her head, she won't let it go. I'll make it up to you. You tell these victims so the rich men did pay a considerable sum for moral damages and promised not to appear in the couple's lives again." Anthony, having returned home, told Emily that the businessman talked about some video on the internet, and they immediately found the video. From the heart together laughed at what they saw. "You're like a folk heroine," Anthony said, kissing his beloved. "Look at all the comments. And trust me, about 90% of people are amazed at your bravery. They're probably glad that at least someone has put those who are used to feeling like the masters of life in their place." After hearing about her sudden fame, a young makeup artist at the salon where Emily still clean suggested she start a blog and even help make the idea a reality. Soon Emily became a real star. Her blog was visited by a huge number of people who cared. 2 companies even offered advertising contracts. Quitting her job, she fully devoted herself to a new hobby that brought noticeable income. Anthony, remaining in the shadow of this fame, was not particularly pleased with the hobby of the bride, but tried not to give the appearance and do not interfere. He only did not like very much that, because of her busyness, she could not find time to go with him to the registry office. Because of his captivity last time, they had not attended the ceremony as scheduled, and Anthony had already suggested several times to apply again. "Don't you want to get married already?" he asked his beloved once again, but she only jokingly brushed it off. She kissed him tenderly, and wrapping her arms around his neck, added, "I love you very much, and we will definitely get married. Only let's do it a little later. There is no time at all with these advertisers. We're together, and that's what matters." Anthony did not bring up the subject again. Life continued to go on. Olivia was growing up and would be going to school in September. On such an important day for her, Anthony and Emily put aside all their business and ceremoniously took their daughter to the 1st grade. Olivia looked like a doll in a white blouse, a cherry sundress, and the same lacquered shoes. She'd picked them out herself when they bought the uniforms. She wore 2 huge bows on her head and a beautiful bouquet in her hands. Emily, admiring her daughter, thought then that now no one would dare to call her a beggar. After all, she was not worse than other children, and perhaps even better than some. After seeing Olivia off, they went about their business. Anthony to work, Emily to go home to write a new post and call the advertising people. As she approached the driveway, she saw a familiar silhouette. The man also saw her and, rising from the bench, began to wave happily. But Emily herself was not happy about the meeting. "Didn't expect it, did you?" began, grinning, the guest. "Here's a recent recliner. I thought I'd never see you again. And then I accidentally got on the internet, and a familiar face. I missed you." He reached out and tried to stroke her face. But Emily pushed his palm away. "What do you want? Why did you come?" she asked sharply, and was about to leave. But her former lover, and it was a relieved Jason, grabbed her wrist sharply. He squeezed her hand tightly and hissed through his teeth. "What are you talking about? I don't think so. In one of your videos, I noticed a little girl you were raving about as if she were your daughter. I did some math and calculations and realized that's my daughter." Emily tried to wrench her arm away, but the criminal wrapped both hands around her waist, locking them behind the woman's back, pulling her as close to him as possible. He whispered in her ear, "You won't get away from me that easily. My daughter is mine, so either you give me a payoff or I will come to see her every day." At that moment, Anthony suddenly appeared. He stopped like a dumbfounded man, and after a moment he asked, "There's something I don't understand what's going on. Emily, can you explain?" The woman finally shushed Jason and began to ramble on about who the rascal was and what he wanted. But suddenly the man himself jumped into the conversation. "I suggest we move to your house. You don't want a scandal to break out, for the neighbors to see and hear it, and then post it on the internet," Jason said wryly. Emily tried to kick the rascal out, but Anthony suddenly said menacingly, "Why not? I hope I hear something interesting that I didn't know about your relationship." From the first moment he'd entered their apartment, Jason had been acting cocky, claiming that they were now obligated to receive him as an honored guest. After all, he was Olivia's biological father, and he insisted that he was the one who bled in the girl. He didn't want to hear anything else. That evening, when he left, he said that he would visit the child regularly, which completely spoiled the happy atmosphere of their home. It was as if a black cat had run between Anthony and Emily. Despite her explanations, the man withdrew. It was as if he was replaced. From cheerful and loving, he turned into a withdrawn, immersed in his thoughts. Almost every night, Anthony began to drink alone at home or came home drunk from work. Emily didn't know what to do to save their relationship. She tried talking, begging, explaining. She even tried to arrange a romantic dinner. But on this particular night, Anthony didn't come home at all. She tried calling all night, but the phone wasn't answering. Remembering his past disappearance, Emily, afraid that something had happened to him again, went to his workplace in the morning. Seeing Anthony unharmed, she immediately tried to talk. "Honey, where did you spend the night?" "I was very worried," but the man coldly cut her off half a word, replying, I'm not coming home again. At least not while you're there with Olivia. Now that the girl has a father, you need to raise her together. I'm not rushing you, but I think you need to go back to your apartment and build a new relationship with him, making it clear that the conversation was over. He turned around and walked towards the entrance. After finding out where and how to get a DNA test, she went to her old apartment. Her ex had mentioned when he'd come by that he'd taken up residence there, claiming he had as much right to the place as she did. Emily hadn't counted on getting lucky. She thought she'd have to sit around for hours waiting for him to leave the house, but luck smiled on her. Half an hour after she'd sat on the bench under the trees across the street, Jason came out of the driveway and walked away. As soon as he got on the bus, Emily went almost jogging to the apartment. When she entered the bathroom, she immediately saw the toothbrush and quickly put away in the prepared bag. Emily realized that the owner of the object would surely notice its disappearance, but at that moment she didn't care at all. A few days later, the result was ready, and Emily went straight from the lab to Anthony's workplace. He pretended not to notice her arrival, but the woman was not going to retreat, standing in his way. She held out a folded sheet of paper. Anthony also silently unfolded the document and, quickly running his eyes over it, walked over to her, then hugged her and happily said, "God, what a fool I am. How could I not believe you? Forgive me, my dear. I've been very unhappy these days without you. I was bored and tried to drown it all in alcohol." Emily stood silent, tucked into his chest, afraid to let go. Anthony, pulling away slightly, took her face in his palms and kissed her. "Well, I now seem to be about to lose my job again through your fault, if I'm late," he said with a smile. Back home, Emily didn't walk, but flew on the wings of happiness. On the way, she made a copy of the examination results and decided to drive back to her old apartment. She wasn't going to see Jason. She wrote a note calling Jason a con man and a scoundrel, put it in an envelope with a copy of the DNA test, and dropped it in his mailbox, asking him at the end of the letter not to come near their family again. Threatened with being sent back to prison, Emily breathed a sigh of relief and went home to prepare the romantic dinner she knew for sure Anthony would show up for. He did indeed return on time, with a huge bouquet. Right in the middle of the hallway, Anthony held out a small velvet box to her and said, "Emily, sunshine, love, I beg you, marry me. Only after almost losing you, I realized that I can no longer live without you." The next day they applied, and a month later they finally signed. Emily was in the same expensive dress which she bought for their first failed celebration. When they began pouring champagne after the wedding, she covered her glass with her hand and asked her husband for juice. "Beloved, don't you want a drink to our finally accomplished event?" Anthony asked in surprise. She smiled enigmatically and replied, "I don't think it would be good for our baby or baby girl," taking his wife's hands in his own, in a voice trembling with excitement. Anthony asked again, "Is it true? We're having a baby boy and I want a baby sister." Olivia enthusiastically jumped and ran up to the newlyweds, hugging both of them at once. Everyone was glowing with happiness that day, realizing that a completely different, happy life was coming next. Melanie. She never thought that in her 40s her life would change abruptly. It would seem that everything was going her way: a successful marriage, a decent job, a house, a full cup, and a beautiful daughter went 2 weeks ago to conquer Beijing. What else could a woman dream of? But it was not so simple. That morning, when a woman who identified herself as Jessica called her and asked her to come down to her car, Melanie's first thought was that she might have blocked someone's exit or been hit by someone else's car door. As usual, she left a note with her contacts under the windshield wiper. After answering the phone, Melanie dressed quickly and went downstairs with only a jacket on. However, there was no one near her bright red car. The yard was nearly empty. By 11 o'clock, there were almost no cars left in the parking lot, and the drizzle had chased away the few passers-by and the elderly women who liked to expose their faces to the sun on the benches. Melanie looked around in bewilderment, but saw no signs of life. She slowly walked over to her car and began to inspect it. The woman was a little nearsighted, so she didn't immediately notice the brown envelope sticking out from under the windshield wiper. "What the hell is that?" Melanie muttered. She tugged at the envelope, but immediately thought she shouldn't touch unidentified objects. Curiosity got the better of her. Melanie ripped open the edge of the thick package. Inside were pictures. "With me?" the woman thought. "No, they're all blurry. They're definitely not of me." Melanie squinted, trying to get a better look at the contents of the pictures, but all she could see were silhouettes, and the quality of the photos themselves was poor. She looked around the yard with a pang in her head for anyone. Melanie made the most sensible decision not to freeze in the rain in her slippers, but to go home, where it was warm, dry, and she had her glasses. But when Melanie put on her glasses, she immediately regretted it. Melanie would rather have remained standing under the drizzling fall sky, blissfully ignorant. She looked at one photograph after another, but with each new picture her face grew more and more gloomy. What is this? Some kind of joke? Melanie mumbled to herself in bewilderment and wanted to laugh. But her intuition told her that what she was seeing was not a joke or a montage. In the first photo, Edward was sitting behind the glass of a cafe. It would have been strange, because coffee was always respected in their family. But Melanie's husband was holding some girl's hand, holding it gently. Even the photo showed it. Melanie tensed, but immediately dismissed the suspicion. She dismissed it too soon. In the second photo, Edward was already playfully holding his companion, covering the passenger door of his fancy car. But the most interesting part began on the third card. The pictures were large format. Melanie could savor the details of this portrait. Her dear and beloved husband, passionately embracing his vis-a-vis, with his free hand opened the door of the famous hotel in the city. It was where Melanie and Edward had celebrated their 15th anniversary 5 years ago. The memory of the place was still fresh. That made Melanie's heart sting in a treacherous way. But the next pictures were taken from a completely different point of view, and the optics were better. The third-floor window of the hotel was the central character in the shot. They didn't even draw the curtains. "Okay, that's Edward," Melanie said, laughing hysterically. "You're out of your mind. He's a grown man, and he can't even think. I couldn't think better of him." And through these curtains outside the hotel room window, everything that was going on in the room was clearly visible. Melanie wouldn't show such a thing to her children, and she would prefer not to watch it herself. But alas, there was no turning back time, and there was no memory wipe function in the woman's head. Melanie bit her lip and carefully placed the pictures on the table. There was no desire to review them. Everything was clear enough. Melanie just didn't know how to be hysterical. Ever since she was a child, she had been unusually calm and reserved. She had pissed off her mother, a woman who was boring and prone to swearing. "That's incredible," Melanie grinned to herself. Edward was a good man. He cheated, so it was fine. And he didn't even show it. He'd always been so thoughtful and caring. I wonder what he was missing. I mean, we had a good thing going. I don't understand men. What am I supposed to do now? She thought aloud. Should I throw a tantrum? They say it's always both men's fault when they cheat. But no, I just don't get it. We've been married for 20 years, through so much went through. Tired or just adventurous? No, I'm not going to put up with this. What if it's a joke after all? Melanie questioned. Why would anyone send me these pictures? Should I call? She immediately dialed the number. She dialed the number of the woman who had called her, who had probably left the pictures on the car. There was no answer for a long time. Melanie was about to hang up, but suddenly a cheerful voice came from the other end of the line. "Hello. Wait." "I'm sorry," Melanie began, trying to choose her words. "Did you call me the other day and ask me to come down to the car?" "Melanie?" the woman said. "Yes, I think you already got my message." "If you mean the photo, yes," Melanie grinned. "I'm just not sure what to make of it. The content of the pictures speaks for itself." "Excuse me, but who are you?" Me, the woman sighed. "My name is Jessica. I believe I've already introduced myself. I'm a private investigator. You know, tracking down unfaithful spouses, looking for missing kittens and so on." "You do?" Melanie was surprised. "But how come you were following my husband?" "I didn't hire anyone. Moreover, I had no idea that he was going off to the left." "That's the way it is," Jessica laughed nervously. "You see, I was hired by the husband of the lady who accompanies your Edward in the photo," Jessica explained. "He insisted that I give you the pictures. I don't make that decision on my own." "Not even like that." Melanie was surprised. "I wonder why this man would want to contact me. But his wife is cheating on him. You'd have to deal with it yourself. Is it really necessary to involve third parties?" You, by the way, in fact, destroyed my strong marriage, she said with offense. Don't you think that's a bit much? Maybe I wanted to continue to live in blissful ignorance. The less you know, the better you sleep, as they say. Are you serious? Jessica grinned. Of course, it might be easier for many people, but I think it's better to know the truth. And the sooner that happens, the better. Who knows how long he would have led you on and what it would have led to in the end. Melanie thought for a moment. And yet, to be honest, I'm at a complete loss. It's hard to know whether this information is for the good or not. Either way, I can't undo what I've done. But how can I be sure it's not a montage? Maybe you're just trying to slander my husband. Or maybe you're just a fraud and you're trying to get what you want. What could I possibly be after? Jessica objected. Scammers usually ask for money, and I just gave you the pictures. If you don't want to believe me, it's up to you, but if you still doubt, it's easy. I can give you the photos in their original form, all the shooting I did on a professional camera, and the sources are in my computer. Can you come to my office? I have nothing to hide. I don't see the need for that, Melanie said. I'll believe you, especially since I don't know much about all this, and I think that if you want, you can fake the original pictures. But what am I supposed to do with all this information now? You're such an interesting woman. You gave me the dirt, and that's it. And now I'm sitting here thinking. You're right about that, Melanie. Jessica sighed. I'm sorry I made you worry, but I'm telling you, I did everything on my client's orders. Then maybe you'd be so kind as to give me his contact information so I don't scold you for nothing, Melanie suggested. Let him have it. I'm not at liberty to divulge such information, Jessica replied. The only thing I can do is to let him know you want to talk to him, and he will contact you if he feels it necessary. Do as you see fit, Melanie said. But I don't think I want to talk to him. I won't waste any more of your time, Jessica. I won't thank you. It's not the right situation, but I'll give you credit. Melanie didn't wait for an answer and pressed the hang-up button. Her mind was a mess. She should have gone to Jessica's office. But Melanie didn't feel like contacting anyone right now. All she wanted to do was spit in her Edward's face and never see him again. Not that Melanie was the kind of woman who didn't want to deal with the situation. Oh no, she wanted to. She just didn't know what to say or do in such cases. Melanie had always been proud of her marriage. She had met Edward when they were young, at a college festival. Edward had immediately noticed Melanie's bright appearance and artistry, and he wasn't the only one. She remembered vividly how her future husband and another suitor, Peter, had fought for her hand and heart. Both boys had been boxing at the time, and had set up a makeshift ring in the garage. Peter lost. Melanie wasn't particularly upset. She didn't take them seriously. She appreciated Edward's feat, however. She treated his abrasions and applied band-aids, saying, "What a fool you are, Edward. Should I have proved my feelings to you like that?" They married when Melanie was 19. She had just entered her sophomore year, and Edward was already working as a process engineer at a chemical plant. Melanie's mother was not happy, believing that her daughter deserved a better party than a penniless engineer. But Melanie rarely considered her mother's opinion. Moreover, this lady was rarely guided by common sense. That's why she was left alone with a 1-year-old daughter in her arms. Liv Young began to live in the apartment, which Melanie inherited from her father. Despite disagreements with his former wife, John about his daughter did not refuse, supported her as he could. But he could not rejoice in the happiness of his beloved daughter. He did not live for 6 months. Melanie and Edward lived amicably. They had never been in love. But with Ashley's birth, the marriage only grew stronger. Melanie transferred to a correspondence school so that she wouldn't have to take a leave of absence because of her pregnancy. She studied hard and almost immediately went to work. By that time, Edward was already working as a leading engineer, having managed to build a good career in a few years, and then he went into private business. Business was booming, their daughter was growing up, and money began to appear in the family. The couple got a luxury country house, every year traveled to a new country. And soon young Ashley was seriously interested in China. After another trip, all her thoughts were occupied with this country. Her parents paid for language courses and often took her to the Celestial Empire, so that her daughter could get better acquainted with foreign culture. Ashley was thrilled. Melanie herself was equally thrilled. She loved traveling with her daughter and watching Ashley develop her passion. By the time she was 13, she knew that sooner or later she would go to live and work in China. Only Edward did not share her opinion, but continued to pay for tutors, and then Ashley's studies at the Faculty of Oriental Studies. The couple's life went on as usual, with only occasional surprises in the form of sudden appearances from Melanie's mother. And then Ashley left for an internship in the country of her dreams, got a prestigious job in an international company, and stayed there, continuing to study remotely. She rarely came to visit and limited herself to video calls with her parents. Melanie herself, though she missed her daughter a lot, understood perfectly well that Ashley had everything and there was no point in wanting more. But it turned out that things weren't so good. Melanie stood in the middle of the bedroom, contemplating what to do. The decision came quickly and suddenly, apparently inspired by some of the old Italian movies she and Edward loved to watch together. Well, if she loves Marcello Mastroianni so much, let her be in his shoes, Melanie thought gloatingly, and rushed toward the pantry. So where's the suitcase? Melanie pulled out from under a pile of folded winter clothes the huge wheeled suitcase her husband liked to take on vacation. Edward used to joke that this could easily fit a whole house like a turtle. Melanie grinned. She gently stroked the gold lid of the suitcase with her hand. Her fingers glided over the stickers with the flags and symbols of the different countries the couple had visited over the years. Most of all, Melanie liked the funny fat monkey with a toothy mouth inviting them to Bali. It was their third trip. At that time, compatriots were just beginning to travel to Indonesia. The destination was just gaining popularity. Melanie remembered well how they had been caught in a tropical downpour. It had been an unfortunate misunderstanding that the trip had fallen during the rainy season, but she and Edward had hardly left the hotel then, and it had filled their vacation with a unique romance. Melanie bit her lip angrily and pushed the sentimental memories away. She abruptly threw back the lid of the suitcase and began to put all of her husband's belongings from the shelves into it. Shirts, pants, jackets crumpled mercilessly under their weight. Melanie was not ceremonious with expensive suits, nor with snow-white t-shirts, which her husband loved so much. On top of it all, the woman stacked shoes and sneakers, not forgetting the toothbrush and electric razor. When everything was ready, Melanie proudly rolled the suitcase out into the hallway. The process of packing up her belongings caused her adrenaline to surge. Melanie hadn't felt so elated in a long time, and she was desperate for something to make herself happy. The woman dressed quickly and went outside. It was still drizzling rain. With a wince, Melanie ran to the car and started the engine. The engine rumbled happily, smelling her mistress. Well, let's go, Melanie decided. And now the music is louder, the pedal to the floor and forward towards adventure. But Melanie's adventures were limited to a little shopping at the local mall and a trip to a coffee shop, where the desperate woman allowed herself an unprecedented luxury, ordered a whole cake, and managed to eat it all. On the way home, Melanie realized that such a sweet weakness was unnecessary. When she got up to the apartment, the woman almost tripped over the ill-fated suitcase and immediately went to bed. The overabundance of glucose had energized her at first, but now it was stubbornly demanding a reboot. Melanie fell asleep on the couch. The sound of the door opening woke her up. Melanie opened her eyes and took a long time to adjust to the semi-darkness of the living room. Finally, Edward's voice came from the hallway. "Lion cub. What is this?" he asked in surprise, appearing in the living room doorway. "Are we going on vacation? Are you trying to surprise me? So about such things should be warned in advance. I have work to do." She put a suitcase on the doorstep. "I almost fell in the dark on my vacation." Looking at her husband, Melanie shuddered. "Yes, honey, on vacation. From this very minute, I'm letting you go on vacation. You don't have to waste time packing. I've already packed everything for you. I think I put everything you could possibly need in your suitcase. If I forgot anything, I'll send it by courier." "What courier?" Edward was stunned. "Melanie, are you out of your mind? Or are you still asleep? Why on earth would you let me go anywhere?" "I wasn't going anywhere." "You've packed a suitcase," Edward continued to explain what was going on. "Are you not feeling well?" "I feel fine," Melanie laughed nervously. "And I'm not crazy." I'm not so sure about you, Melanie said. I don't get it, Edward frowned. I don't get it, Edward frowned. Melanie handed him the envelope. Edward took the cardboard folder incredulously and opened it along the tier line. He pulled out the photographs and quickly thumbed through them. A blush flooded the man's face. This. Stammering, the husband began to justify himself. What is this? Where did you get this? What does it matter where it came from? Good people shared it, Melanie said gloatingly. It's none of your business. Let's just skip the questions. Edward, there's no need for that. We're adults now. I don't want any scandal or hysterics, you know. It's not in my nature. Have you done something wrong? Move on. I don't want to discuss it. But Edward looked up at her, not looking at the pictures. This is pure montage. I've never cheated on you in my life. I'm sure my competitors were just trying to ruin my reputation. How could you believe that? You know, that's what I thought at first. That's what I thought of you. But they're not competitors, Edward. Be a man. Take responsibility for what you do. We're all human beings, and I can even understand you cheating. But don't lose face, at least for now. But I'm not lying to you, shrieked the husband. What are you talking about? Cheating and cheating. I've never seen this girl before. I swear to you. This girl's husband obviously doesn't think so. Melanie squinted at him. He's the one who gave me those pictures and videos. Husband? No way. Naomi, then Melanie laughed. And you said you didn't know her. Oh, Edward, you were never good at lying. I shouldn't have started. Why can't it be Naomi? The man muttered. My husband gave me the pictures and video of him, yes, but that doesn't change anything. The pictures were given to me by the private investigator this man hired to follow you, Edward. Tell me honestly, just straight up honestly. How long have you been with her? Melanie asked. You don't hire detectives for a one-time fling. There was no point in denying it. Edward took a deep breath and sank down in his chair. Now that it's turned out this way. Melanie, I'm sorry, I should have told you a long time ago. I just chickened out. I don't even know what came over me. Naomi, her and I. Don't sigh already, as if the young lady were feeling sorry for you. Melanie interrupted him unhappily. Cheated and cheated. It can't be helped. Just say it as it is. We'll think about forgiveness later. Okay, the man nodded. Anyway, Naomi and I have been dating for about a year now. I don't know how it happened. We met at a seminar. She works for the firm of one of our contractors. We just hit it off. Somehow it all went off at once. It was interesting. Then I got drunk, and Melanie. I'm sorry. Just keep talking. I want to know everything. And everything happened, Edward continued. I felt so guilty, thinking about telling you everything. But then I ran into her again. And it happened all over again. It was like I was sucked into a whirlpool. Then I found out she was married. But even that didn't stop us. It's just a kind of mental confusion. But Melanie, I promise you I'll break up with her, but I'm sorry. You mean you've had this going on for a year? Melanie shook her head. I didn't even realize it. Do you often go to hotels like this? Don't get cute now. I know a lot of things. Let's see if you're being honest. Once, sometimes twice a week, Edward answered. When her husband was in town, she couldn't see him. He wasn't here much. She and I usually have a hotel room during the day. So? Fine. Just fine. Melanie laughed. I'm surprised I didn't suspect anything. A man who hardly ever shows up here even managed to admit that his wife was unfaithful. You know, at first I was so angry at him for sending it to me. I even thought it would have been better if I hadn't known. Melanie continued. But now I look at you and see how pathetic and ridiculous your excuses are. And I realize that I didn't get this information for nothing. You never even loved me. Melanie, what are you talking about? Edward blushed. I don't know how I can make it up to you. I swear I wasn't in control of myself. It's some kind of addiction, a destructive passion. I'll get treatment if I have to. You don't seem to be curing yourself of infidelity. Melanie shook her head. All right, Edward, calm down. What happened is what happened. I don't hold a grudge against you. Everyone steps in, even after years of marriage. But I don't want to live under the same roof with you. So take your suitcase and go. Where am I going, Melanie? What are you talking about? Let's settle this peacefully. What's the point of this scandal? What's the big deal? What's the big deal? We're talking calmly. If you don't want to go, I'll go. Except that this apartment is mine, it was ours. But now that things have turned out this way, you, Edward, are a man of means. You have money. Get your own place. Or live in the cottage until you've made up your mind. I have no claim on it. Or you could go to Naomi. I think her husband's had his say, too. Will you be happy together without complicating things? Melanie. What's Melanie? I've been here 40 years. Melanie never thought she'd be facing something like this at that age. You know very well, Edward, that I'm ready to turn a blind eye to many things, but I can't turn a blind eye to betrayal. Go away. I promise you, go away, I say. Melanie grabbed the remote from the table and swung it at her husband. Edward gave in under her pressure. He'd never seen Melanie like this before. There was such a powerful energy emanating from the woman that Edward was frightened. He waved his hand and left the room. A moment later, Melanie heard the door close behind her husband. Melanie sank helplessly to the couch and burst into tears. She hadn't cried in years. She wasn't the type to let out a tear at the slightest emotion. Right now, it was resentment and misunderstanding that spoke to her, and conscience. Melanie still thought she'd been too harsh in driving her husband away. But immediately, somewhere in the back of her mind, there was a new, still unfamiliar feeling. It spoke of freedom. Saturday morning. The phone vibrated on the nightstand. Melanie turned unhappily and reached for it, but then she accidentally waved her hand, and the smartphone hit the parquet with a resounding thud. Damn it, Melanie scolded, rubbing her eyes and trying to reach her hand to the floor. But where are you? Finally, she managed to fumble for the cold metal casing. Melanie grasped the phone, though it kept trying to slip out of her fingers. God, the woman frowned. It's only 9 in the morning. He can't wait to get me up this early, can he? The caller's number was unknown to Melanie. She didn't call back, thinking if someone needs someone, he'll call back. Melanie lay in bed for a few more minutes, trying to sleep. But sleep evaporated. The woman got up and headed out to make herself some coffee. She usually brewed for 2 and had already poured the usual amount of beans into the coffee maker. But she immediately realized it and even laughed when everything was ready. Melanie went out onto the balcony and lit a cigarette. Only now she realized that she hadn't taken a cigarette since yesterday morning, since Jessica had called her. Melanie even thought that was extremely unlike her, especially since she'd been smoking for years. And when she was nervous, it doubled in number. Melanie looked contemptuously at the cigarette, crushed it into the ashtray, and made a clear and conscious decision not to waste any more time and money on this unhealthy habit. Taking a big sip of coffee, Melanie grumbled. The sun was shining brightly outside the window. There was no trace of yesterday's gloom. Even the asphalt had already dried. It's a good thing I don't have to go to work today, Melanie thought. I didn't show up yesterday. Didn't even call them, didn't even warn them. Well, they weren't worried, so they must be okay. I'll explain to Franklin Hannah later. Oh yeah, I'll tell him I wasn't feeling well. I couldn't even make a phone call. The old lady will believe it. She's away for a while anyway. Thank God. Otherwise she'd have been all over me yesterday. Melanie was distracted from her thoughts by the phone. The woman had left it on the table in the kitchen, so she quickly left the balcony to answer it. The number was the same as the one that had woken her up. Hello, she said in a less than friendly tone. Melanie? An unfamiliar male voice answered the phone. I'm listening. Pardon me, for God's sake, if I woke you up, I just now realized it's a day off, said the stranger. My name is Max. We have already met in absentia. Your number was given to me by Jessica. Melanie grinned. So you are that deceived husband who decided that he could ruin the lives of others since he himself screwed up. Why are you being so rude? Max replied in a friendly manner. I, Melanie, had my reasons. And what reasons, I wonder? Melanie wondered. I can't tell you on the phone yet. You may think it was my revenge on an old enemy. I don't understand anything at all. I'm sorry, Max, but you're acting strange. What's all this secrecy? Did your wife cheat on you? It happens to everyone. My husband cheated on me too. We'll get over it. It's not the first and won't be the last. But I'm still very angry with you. I don't like outsiders interfering in my life. That's for your own good, Melanie. Well, it's for your own good. You know where the road is paved with good intentions? Hell. As far as I remember, it's not folk wisdom. It was written in the 12th century by a monk, Bernard Clear, if I'm not mistaken. Really? Melanie was surprised. I remember that its author lived 6 centuries later. His name was Samuel Johnson. He was a poet and a philosopher. I suddenly remembered Max answered. Melanie was surprised. Not everyone could give out information like that out of the blue. What does that mean? She grinned. You were also a philosopher once? But I didn't make it. I studied at the sociology department. They told us a lot of useful things there, including this one. What a coincidence. Melanie smiled. I was a sociology student too. You and I must have studied at the same alma mater. Are you from around here? Melanie? I see we're having a good dialogue, Max said. I'm a little busy right now. If you want to talk to me, even if it's on the subject of philosophy, I'm ready to invite you today and have a snack at lunch. Why should I go out with you? We don't even know each other. But we're sort of fellow travelers. We are, aren't we? And since we're connected by a kind of vicious chain, I suggest we get to know each other in person, cry on each other's shoulder. It's very strange, but somehow I think you're flirting with me. Melanie frowned. Don't get me wrong. I just thought that since we're both in this situation, we could at least be quiet together. Even though I'm a public person, I don't have any close friends. I don't even have anyone to talk to about what's going on. Naomi was the only one, but I just slammed the door after that. I can't even look at her. So I was thinking, psychologists say that sometimes a stranger can be more helpful than a friend. So walk up to someone on the street. There's always plenty of people to talk to. No, it's not like that, Melanie. No, Melanie, don't say no, please. It's a drowning man's request. Don't let me drown. You are strange, Max, she shook her head. You forgot my name too, sharply. Okay, I will not torture you. What if the advice of these psychologists really works? Melanie said. As they say, chutzpah the second happiness. I've always liked people who persevere in their goals. I feel that you are one of them. So I'll give you a chance to talk. Just pick your own place. I don't really go to cafes and restaurants. I'm not very good at navigating. Well, why don't I pick you up at 3? Yes, what's the address? What if you're some kind of freak and you follow me around? Max, I can easily get your address from Jessica. You'll forget it. Still, I'd feel more comfortable driving up to the place myself. What if I want to go somewhere else right now? You call me at 2. Tell me where to meet you. I'll go, just like a woman. Okay, we'll call then, agreed Max. But I beg you, don't be late. I really need to talk to you. Melanie had no idea who this Max was or who he expected to see, so she didn't prepare herself much for the meeting. According to Jessica and the man himself, he was a difficult man. But that didn't bother the woman much. By lunchtime, she put herself in order, gathered her hair in a high ponytail, put on jeans and her favorite sweater. She wasn't going to impress anyone, so she didn't even put on makeup. At exactly 2 o'clock, Max called and appointed a meeting in a cafe. The place was posh. Melanie even thought it would be nice to change clothes. But time was short, and the last thing she cared about was what the people around her thought of her. She decided to walk to the place Max had chosen. The weather was fine, and she didn't feel like looking for a parking lot. After running a couple of blocks, Melanie found herself at the entrance. Lunch was over long ago, so there weren't many people around. She stepped inside and looked around. The room was almost empty, with only a couple of tables occupied by couples and an older man. Melanie walked confidently toward the latter. She figured that's how Max should look, though he sounded younger. Hello, She addressed the man. "You're not expecting me," Max, the older man, said. "And I'd be surprised if I had such a companion. But you're probably mistaken." "Oh, I'm sorry." Melanie was embarrassed and immediately stepped aside. She took a table by the window. The chair was very soft and comfortable. A porcelain-faced waitress materialized out of thin air and took her order. Melanie didn't think long and asked for green tea, jasmine, and seafood salad. She had an appetite after the walk. The woman looked at her watch. All right, she laughed to herself. She was early herself, and she was bothering grandfather. Well, at least I'll have time to eat. The salad was delicious. Melanie devoured the mussels and shrimp, flavored with some spicy sauce. Good appetite. A pleasant baritone sounded above her ear. Melanie shuddered. "I apologize for being late. Traffic came from somewhere. I was thinking of walking." "Max." Melanie turned around before she could swallow another bite. It wasn't a very good greeting. "Sit, sit," Melanie, the man said, and sat down across from her. It was only then that Melanie got a good look at him. "Oh my God," she breathed out. "It can't be, Peter. Is that you?" "It is." And Melanie, it is, the man nodded. "Now you see why I insisted on seeing you in person." Melanie sat paralyzed. She hadn't seen this man since she'd been a part-time student after her unfortunate boxing match with Edward. Peter had been distant then and hadn't even looked in her direction. And after college, he'd lost her. So that's where the philosophizing came from. She just blurted out, "Peter, how could it be? It's surreal." "God, Melanie, you'll get used to life. It's not like that," Peter replied. "When I found out who Naomi was cheating on me with, I was speechless. I checked everything right away. Melanie's wife is with her lover. And he's the enemy of my youth. Edward. Tell me, is there such a thing?" "No, it doesn't," Melanie laughed. "I can imagine your face when Jessica showed you Edward's pictures," Peter said. "But mine isn't any better now." There was a look of beautiful surprise on his face. "I didn't realize you hadn't changed much," Melanie said. "Only your hair is longer than it was at the Institute." "Peter, I still can't believe it. It's not true. There's no such thing as coincidence. I seriously doubt now that those pictures were real. Come on, is this your way of avenging all your wrongs, Edward?" "If it were a joke, I'd give a lot," Peter sighed. "But it wasn't. And I'm not the kind of man to take revenge. Those photos aren't the only proof of the affair. Jessica did a good job. I've been following Naomi for 3 months. She's a good girl." "All right. She had everything she needed. She had it all." "Did you two talk?" Melanie asked. "I kicked Edward out the door last night," she said. "I thought I'd been cruel. I could have forgiven him. Today I realize I did the right thing. It would have been okay if he'd made a mistake once. But a year of cheating. The thing I hate most is to be made a fool of." "I remember that well," Max laughed. "Even your teachers were afraid to argue with you, because they could always be wrong." "And then what?" Melanie asked. "If you're right, fight to the end." "That's right. I've always looked up to you," Peter nodded. "A girl can put anyone in his place, and you don't need any strength. It was us, fools, who waved our fists." "I suffered so much then. I loved her," he continued. "I loved you, Melanie, and I really loved you. Was this Edward of yours just a trophy hunter? I'd been friends with him before, and I knew him well. I was surprised when I heard you two were married. I always thought someone great should be around someone like you," Melanie sighed. "He was afraid to go near her because he thought he wasn't worthy." "What kind of nonsense are you saying?" Max laughed. "We do not live in the 13th century. Worthy, unworthy people make themselves." Melanie said thoughtfully. "Edward, though he turned out to be a scoundrel, was ultimately a good husband and man. He made me feel like I was behind a wall. He was a good father, too." She paused for a moment and then added, "I don't know how to tell Naomi now, so I'll hold off for now. She's an adult, she'll get over it." "Are you going to get a divorce?" Peter asked. "Where can I go?" Let her live as she wants. I can't forgive her. My pride won't allow it. What have you decided? But Naomi and I haven't lived 20 years. Only 5. It will be easier, Max said. Though only a couple months ago I thought that I would kill her, and forgive, and love, and hate. Now I'm relieved. I won't leave without a penny. She was a close person, even pregnant twice. But God didn't let her carry her to term. She miscarried. She'll get an apartment in the center and a good allowance. I'm not greedy, but let her forget about me. I don't tolerate deceit and hypocrisy. That's how we were brought up in the sociology department, Peter nodded. Remember how much Hannah was worth? She gave everyone the title of ignoramus. It was a shame. It was only later that I realized she was right to set us up like that. You'd do anything to avoid that humiliating label. She taught us honesty and everything. Yeah, she was a great woman. I wish everyone who teaches philosophy could be like that. By the way, that phrase about good intentions was her favorite, Melanie said. Yeah, Max grinned. When you started arguing on the phone about the author of the aphorism, I immediately remembered the second year. That's how life pits people against each other, Peter sighed. It's not like that, but it's not like that either. So what do you do? Max asked. Let's at least talk about life. This whole thing about unfaithful spouses is kind of sad. Yeah, I work for a non-profit organization called Fraser, Peter answered. And we do a lot of charity work, supporting people in difficult circumstances. We help orphanages. Hannah is a strong-willed, iron-willed woman who loves people and won't let anyone go to waste. And I'm her right-hand man, said Peter. Fraser's not young anymore. She turned 10 last year. She can't give up her community work. She likes to do good deeds. I know your Fraser very well, said Max. How? Melanie was surprised. That's strange, Melanie. You yourself say that you do charity work. And where do you get sponsors? Do you pay out of your own pocket? I've been a philanthropist for a long time. I have my own holding. Almost all the supermarkets in town are mine, de facto though. But de jure, they're owned by different companies. I don't like to publicize my holdings. I have a lot of money, but nowhere to spend it. I really don't know where to invest. I'm all over the place. Where do I save? I'm done with Naomi. I don't have kids. If I die, they'll take it all away. So I decided to start a charity. Really? Melanie was surprised. But why haven't I ever seen your name on a list of sponsors? Why would I want to attract attention? I've been with your foundation for a long time, Melanie. I work personally with Hannah. We do business without outsiders. I don't want to start any rumors. You know money likes silence. Happiness. I guess Melanie frowned. Happiness, too. It's better not to talk too much. Remember the old Soviet poster? I have it in my office, the main credo. So you're a powerful and rich man now? Melanie grinned. I didn't think so. And in the institute was so modest. If it wasn't for boxing, you would have been labeled a nerd. Nerds rarely succeed in life, Max replied. Look at all the honors students from yesterday. Fred got drunk at Morgan's. Remember Wilson? Morgan's got one zone behind his back, and he's in jail now, for all I know. The girls got married, Samantha. I don't remember her last name. She was the smartest girl in the class. She used to sit behind you in class. Samantha's life didn't work out, Max said. What about her? We were even friends, Melanie said. But when I got married, I cut off all ties. Samantha died about 7 years ago. Her roommate did it. That's awful. Melanie shuddered, remembering the pleasant, smiling face of her friend. Yes, honors students aren't always happy. Studying is no guarantee of future happiness. Though you're lucky, you're working practically in your specialty. I don't, Max objected. I'm an ordinary merchant. You have to know how to trade, too. I don't stand behind the counter. I make deals with people, establish connections, explore the market. So good for you. I'm always happy for those who succeed with their own mind. Melanie smiled. Thank you, Melanie. Max shone. It's nice to hear from a sincere person. And all around there are only sycophants who want to make money. You can't expect any honesty. smiling for profit. It's normal, Melanie laughed. Everybody wants to eat. Can you judge them for wanting to live a decent life? That's true. But it's possible to be more human, not only to think about profits. Though it wasn't long ago that I realized it myself. About 2 years ago, when Naomi had her last miscarriage. I was really worried. And I realized I was doing something wrong. So I reached out to Hannah. I asked her to help people who didn't have enough money. Good Peter, Melanie stroked his arm. He's always been like that. I'm glad the money didn't ruin you. Look, Melanie, the man suddenly blushed. Would you mind if we could just talk to each other once in a while? What do you mean? She was surprised. No, don't get any ideas. It's just that we're sitting here right now, having a nice chat. I've even forgotten about the time. It's been a while. It's usually just a to-do list in my head. I miss normal human contact, you know? Talking to you, it's like being reborn, like the closest person I've ever met. Don't look at me like that. I'm not exaggerating, Max continued. I even talked to my wife only on business. I don't even blame her for cheating on me. It's like living with a robot. Who would like it? You're the real deal, he smiled at Melanie. Even your simple outfit looks cool in this flashy place. Melanie embarrassedly adjusted the sleeve of her sweater, which showed a large puff. I didn't even think I'd have to come here, she tried to justify herself. It's okay. On the contrary, you look great, like 10 years younger. And you're direct. I like that. I can tell you're not obsessed with the material world. I see you've suffered a lot from the sharks of the material world. If you're so hungry for ordinary human contact, Melanie nodded. Well, let's do it. Why not socialize? I'm alone now, there's not much to do after work or on weekends. We'll at least go to exhibitions and theaters with you. Are you kidding? Max smiled. At exhibitions is not a bad thing, but I can't stand the theater since childhood. But from the simplest walks in the parks in the city will definitely not refuse. I'm all in the office or at the wheel. I come home, my son, Lucia, I have no strength to go anywhere. It's not even from powerlessness, but from lack of motivation. So my psychotherapist advised me to socialize more often with friends and go for walks in the fresh air. You go to a therapist? Melanie was surprised. Well, not that seriously, Max was embarrassed. It's all the consequences of that apathy. I've been in therapy for 2 years now. I go to sessions out of habit, just to talk, you know. Like in American movies? It really helps when you're locked inside yourself like that. You've got a lot of potential and nowhere to release it. So Naomi didn't help you at all? What's she gonna do? She was just a dress-up doll, Max dismissed her. No, I loved her, of course, but not really, but more out of status and habit. Only recently I realized that I was lying to myself. And did it make you feel better? Max nodded. It makes me feel better, of course. And you'll feel better when you realize that you have no one more precious than yourself, Max continued. We all cling to people, things, times. What's the use? On your deathbed, none of that will be there. There won't be anything left. Only yourself. Your will and conscience will remain. And that's what you should dialogue with. You're getting philosophical, aren't you? Melanie laughed. Let's not do that for now. I know everything for now. I just want to digest all the information and try to start again somehow. Peter, I'm very glad that life brought us together again, even if the circumstances were not the best. I'm glad too, Melanie, honestly. So, shall we be friends? We never stopped being friends. Let's just say we've had a forced hiatus. I'm always happy to go out with you. Yes, it's funny, Max smiled. It would probably look funny from the outside. 2 old people wandering around the parks with nothing to do. You shouldn't take everything so seriously. Age is a convention, a mark on a passport. Look, old people enjoy life too. I'm always amused when grandparents walk by the hand, and you and I are not old people at all. It used to be 40 when you had grandchildren to take care of, and now we've got everything ahead of us. We've both made it in life. We don't need it. So why not just enjoy every day? You're right, you're infinitely right, Melanie patted Max's hair. Okay, I gotta go. Thanks for getting me out of the house. Then keep in touch, call right anytime. See if you can think of anything interesting. And you can come to my office. Hannah will be surprised, of course. You shouldn't hide your good deeds, my friend, it's respect-worthy. Not secrets, Max smiled. I'll think about it, friend. Melanie's life was gradually taking a new direction, and Max was the one who paved the way. Very quickly she realized that she and the man had a lot in common. It wasn't just limited to student memories. Their views coincided on the vision of the world, tastes in food and clothes, and a lot of things. And they always had a lot to talk about. Max, however, often liked to inject some philosophy into the conversation. Melanie willingly argued on the proposed topics, which incredibly amused the man, who was used to that. Usually his remark or statement puts people in a dead end. Max became a frequent guest at Melanie's house. Once he stayed overnight, though, on the sofa in the living room. Melanie realized that Peter's feelings for her were not friendly. The man repeatedly made ambiguous hints, gave flowers and compliments. Every time they walked under the arm, he tried to put his arm around Melanie's waist, but she was as hard as a rock. It wasn't that she didn't like Max. She did, but not as a man. He was a great conversationalist, an interesting and versatile man, and a reliable companion. But that wasn't enough for romance. In addition, Melanie often caught herself thinking that strongly misses her husband. She did not hurry to file divorce papers, but she did not dare to call him. That morning Max called Melanie and told her that he was leaving the country for a week for work. "It's just so you don't lose me," he said. But Melanie wouldn't have lost him anyway, to be honest. She was even starting to get a little tired of Max's constant presence around her. It was like he was trying to control her, something Melanie didn't let anyone control her. Even Edward realized it quickly enough, which helped to rid the family of frequent quarrels. Melanie was a free-spirited woman. The evening was free, and the weather was perfect. Suddenly she was desperate to go to the country. All the more so because it was the weekend. There was nothing to do at work, so she asked Hannah to leave early, picked up some snacks at the supermarket, and jumped in the car. Melanie didn't know for sure if Edward would be at the cottage, but she decided that if he was, she would talk to him. She would spend the night and then drive back in the morning. If not, she would stay the whole weekend. Edward's cottage was in a picturesque spot, only 20 minutes from the city. Melanie had chosen the property herself, and Edward had overseen the construction of the house. The cottage was beautiful, in the spirit of the old days. The two-story log house was surrounded by greenery. There used to be a large garden on the plot. Most of the trees had been preserved, which Melanie was very proud of. It was beautiful, and apples and cherries were always in abundance. And now, at the very beginning of October, large apples were still hanging on the branches, as if beckoning to pick them. No one had harvested this year. Since Edward had left, Melanie hadn't gone anywhere. As she drove up to the house, she realized that someone was living there. The gate was open, and loud music was blaring from the yard. Edward's car was nowhere to be seen, but it might as well have been in the garage. Melanie didn't drive into the yard, but parked in the wide cobblestone lot. She grabbed a bag of groceries and went inside. There was no one in front of the house. Melanie climbed the stairs and pulled open the door. It was unlocked. She entered the dusky hallway, put the groceries on the floor, and went in search of her husband. Edward was sitting in a chair on the spacious patio. A half-empty bottle of wine stood on the table beside him. "Hi," Melanie said loudly. The man flinched and turned around. His face immediately broke into a smile. "Melanie, you're here?" He cheered. "Why didn't you call?" "So you're here after all," the woman came over to him and sat down in a nearby chair. "Where else would I go?" Edward grinned, taking another sip of wine from a cut glass. "Where else? What about your Naomi?" Edward frowned, as if remembering something. "Naomi, that's right. It's all gone, Naomi," he exclaimed. "Gone where?" Melanie wondered. "Hell knows, you kicked me out, and I never heard from her again. Do you think I ran straight to her? What are you looking at me like that for?" "I just wanted to call her and tell her it was over." "I love you, Melanie. I really do," Edward said. It was only after all this that I realized that I'd spent my whole life thinking otherwise. "Don't get all sentimental on me," Edward, Melanie said. "And what did she say? She didn't even pick up the phone?" "No, she didn't. She blocked my number. It's ringing, and the answering machine is on. I guess hubby's got her pinned down." "Nailed her?" Melanie frowned. "Tell me, do you even know who your Naomi's husband is?" "Some peddler." "I've never met him. I only know from her words. I know he's on the road a lot, and he's a complicated man. Rich. Would you be interested, darling?" "I mean, literally. Your restless Naomi's husband is Peter Skvortsov." "I think that's good. You remember him? We were friends, weren't we?" "That can't be right." Edward's eyes widened, as if immediately sobering up. "Max? He was a guy who couldn't even take a punch. And here he was a big businessman. I doubt it." "Don't doubt it," Melanie shook her head. "You were lucky enough to steal a wife from an old enemy. You stole a girl when you were young, and then when you were old enough. That's quite a halo, isn't it?" "How do you know?" Edward perked up. "He contacted me, and he said he was surprised too. He was surprised when he found out the truth." "You've been seeing him?" The man blushed. "Let's say I did. What's the big deal? We had to shed some light on the whole situation. So we talked to him about old grievances and new ones. He's not a bad man, Edward. He doesn't hold a grudge. He even forgave his wife. But he left right away. He didn't want to settle things either. He's waiting for a divorce now." "You seem to have a close relationship with him?" "Well, not tightly, but we see each other sometimes. So, Edward's at the cottage, and Melanie's having fun." "Hey, aren't you confused? First of all, I'm not having fun. I'm just talking to an old acquaintance, something to reminisce about, and I ran into him at work. He does a lot of charity work. Secondly, I see you're not slumming it here drinking wine in your garden. And we have a better house than a lot of apartments," Edward continued. "And third, what do you care how I live now?" "Don't mince words. Of course I care. You're my wife no matter what." "That's how you talk," Melanie grinned. "I haven't remembered that I'm your wife for a year, while I was having fun with my mistress." "And now that you've lost everything, have you come to your senses?" she asked sadly. "I repent. I would give anything to return everything and correct my mistakes. But I'm not omnipotent." "I can't forgive you, Edward." "Is it pride or something else? I don't know. All I know is that I hate you. And the contempt is gone, and Rachel hasn't even said anything yet. And she just called the other day. Thank God it was just for a couple minutes. Otherwise, she would have asked, 'How are you doing?' She called me too, but I was really drunk. I just said I was fine." "I knew you wouldn't say anything." Melanie shook her head. "Oh, Edward, you must be hungry." Melanie changed the subject abruptly. She felt that if Edward pushed a little harder, the armor would crack. "I ate something today, I don't remember." "It's always like that," the woman sighed. "But how can I leave you alone? I wish you'd hired a housekeeper. I brought groceries. I'll cook something quickly. Stay here for now." Melanie went into the house and started chopping salad. She wondered what she should do next. Meeting Edward had stirred up the feelings inside her again, and the resentment was stirred up too. So she cooked, torn between her inner contradictions. Melanie was visiting Max for the first time. She had not even expected that an ordinary city apartment could be so chic. The woman even felt ashamed of her own home for a moment, though she lived not poorly and chose the furnishings tastefully. No, Max did not have some black columns, moldings, gilding, antique furniture, and other attributes of wealth. It was an ordinary loft with full wall windows, converted into an apartment from the studio of some Soviet artist. But everything was so tasteful and perfectly styled that it was breathtaking. Melanie was even afraid to breathe in this huge room. "Do you like it?" Max grinned as he escorted her into the living room. The soft lighting from the antique ceiling fixtures. "I don't know. I've been a lot of places, but your place is fantastically beautiful. I never thought lofts could be so cozy. I called in a designer from Italy. He's some kind of hereditary architect and often works on the interiors of famous fashion houses. I don't want to brag. I don't really understand anything about it anyway. The main thing for me is that there was a place to sleep and the plaster didn't crumble. I used to think the dorm was the best place on earth. Melanie laughed. It's a great place to live, Max. I can tell you that. There's plenty of room for everyone. If you sit there in four walls, you'll have more fun. Are you serious now? Melanie frowned. What, are you hitting on me? Come on, Melanie. It's boring. It's not easy. And there's a woman's hand missing here. I can feel it right away. What do you call me? A housekeeper? I'd laugh. The woman snorted. No way. And I have a housekeeper. That's not what I mean. When a woman lives in a house, you can smell it. Even the atmosphere is different. I'm used to Naomi always being home. Now I just can't get used to it. It seems to me that the process of adaptation will go faster if we cope with all this together. Melanie thought for a moment. I don't know. I can get bored alone, of course, but I don't really feel Edward's absence. Melanie's expression was wry. She was acutely aware that everything at home wasn't the same. The couch was no longer cozy, the kitchen floor no longer warm, the air no longer fresh. And the silence. The silence. A sepulchral silence greeted her every evening after work. Melanie had seriously considered getting a cat, but she was afraid he'd be sad alone all day, so she procrastinated. Melanie also missed Edward, especially after they'd met at the cottage. 20 years of living together couldn't go to waste, after all. Melanie was even ready to forgive her husband. Edward had repented quite sincerely. But Max, as if sensing this, tried to distract the woman as much as possible from thoughts of Edward. Melanie, am I serious? Think about it. Everything in your apartment reminds you of your husband. You should be looking forward, not backward. It's better to look back, try to forget. I, for example, didn't even think about it. I moved right in. Naomi and I built this place for us. We thought we'd have a big family. If I'd stayed in the old house, I'd have gone crazy. This is all new. Nothing reminds you of the past. It's a lot of space on your own, but you get used to it. Then why did you call me if you're already used to being alone? Melanie, I'm telling you, I'm just trying to help. I can see you're hurting, just as a friend. I just want you to breathe more quickly. Besides, it's not like I'm suggesting you move here for good. If you don't like it, you can always leave. Oh, I don't know, Melanie frowned. It's kind of sudden, to be honest. It's weird. She promised to at least think about Max's offer. Okay, Melanie grinned. Are you trying to drive me crazy? I'll think about it, but I won't promise anything. It's a deal. Now, since you invited me, give me a tour. I need to know where I'm potentially going to live. Now, that's something else. Max immediately got to work and began to take Melanie around the apartment. On the first floor, there was a huge living room combined with the kitchen and dining room. In fact, the entire space was unified, and one area flowed seamlessly into the other. There was also a guest bedroom, a spacious bathroom, and a storage room. On the second floor were 2 more bedrooms, a gym, an office, and a couple of other rooms that Max hadn't shown yet. What's in there? Melanie wondered when the inspection was over, in front of the closed door. There's nothing to see. He hadn't even done the repairs. We were planning to make children's rooms, Max continued. But one room could of course be made for the servants. You might want a maid to clean the place, or a cook to live here. You're a bourgeois, Peter. Melanie laughed. A maid. Though it takes a lot of effort and money to maintain a place like this. Well, shall we have tea? It's evening. Let's have some wine. I've got a whole wine cabinet in the kitchen, and some very good ones. There's wine? Melanie hesitated. I don't know, I have to work tomorrow. Is that it? Don't worry, we won't get drunk, we'll just have a glass. I'll take you in the morning. Where to? I was actually planning on going home tonight. What's the matter with the 7 of us? Stay. You can have the guest bedroom all to yourself. It's got a bed like that, Melanie. How would you sleep on a cloud? It'll give you a chance to test it out before you decide to move." "Oh, Peter, you're so persistent. I can't believe it." "All right, I'll do it. Besides, it's closer to work from here. But I don't even have anything to change into. There's a lot of clothes in here." "Is this your wife's new stuff?" "No, I made pajamas just for you. You can wear what you're wearing to work. It's a very nice suit. You never leave the office anyway." Okay. It's a deal. Why don't you buy me some of your wine?" Melanie had been living in Max's apartment for 2 months, and she loved it. It was very convenient to get to work from here. She didn't even have to drive, just a block away. And there it was, the office. And she didn't have to think about cooking and cleaning. The housekeeper would take care of everything. Max was behaving himself. He still made explicit comments about his guest, but he kept his hands to himself. Thank you for that. In mid-November, Max was preparing to leave again. He even called Melanie with him, because the trip promised to be interesting to Baikal. The woman seriously thought to agree, still a change of scenery. But the time of year wasn't quite right. And she had a lot of work to do. In the end, Melanie stayed at home. Max left on Friday. Melanie had the whole weekend to herself. Early Saturday morning, the housekeeper came. Melanie didn't usually socialize with this stern woman of indeterminate age who asked to be called Ariadne. Ariadne usually worked during the day when Melanie herself was at work, so they rarely crossed paths. It was mostly Max who socialized with her. But this morning Melanie was bored. She woke up as Ariadne was busily preparing breakfast in the kitchen. "Good morning," Melanie Ariadne said as she sat down at the table. "Good morning, Melanie Nikolaevna," Ariadne replied in a muffled bass. Melanie even shuddered. "What can I prepare for you?" "I'm the guardian of the pancakes. Max said that you like them very much." "I wonder how he knows." "Yeah, I did when I was younger, but then I started watching my figure. The last time he and I had pancakes was in the cafeteria at the college cafeteria. He remembers everything. Tea or coffee?" Ariadne interrupted her memories. "Oh, if I may, tea. I don't like to drink strong black coffee on weekends. Sugar, lemon." "Why, Ariadne? I can put everything in my tea myself." "It's just my job, Melanie Nikolaevna. Don't take offense." "I'm not offended. I'm just not used to it. Like Peter, I'm not used to having other people do everything for me." "Yes?" Ariadne stretched out thoughtfully. "Max has always been like that, as long as I've known him." I wonder, Melanie thought, how long she's known him. I was told he hired this woman when he moved out here from his wife. That's no more than 3 months. Maybe they knew each other before that. "How long have you known Max?" Melanie blurted out, unintentionally. "About 10 years, since he started making millions. That's how he hired me. I used to work in his country house and live there. And last year we moved here, and he even bought me a small apartment nearby." I scolded him so much. "But how can you argue with a man like that?" said Ariadne. "So he's been living here for a year." Melanie was surprised. "I was told he'd just recently moved in." Ariadne even took her eyes off the frying pan. "And the wife. His wife, Rachel, has been gone for years. Max was suffering so much, going crazy in his mansion. We took it all out on him. Didn't he tell you?" No, go on," Melanie nodded. "You see, Max tells me a lot of things, but not everything. I guess his heart doesn't allow it. I want to know him better." "You, Melanie Nikolaevna, are a good woman. I immediately noticed how Max became cheerful when he started talking to you. You're a good influence on him. He usually goes to work with his head. Even the food, it's all the same flavor, whether you try or not." "Naomi, how long have you been pulling him out of this lethargy? It's horrible." Melanie got worried. "Naomi? Well, yes, his sister, you probably know her. She's a tall girl with wavy brown hair, thin." Melanie tensed, trying to conjure up the image of Edward's mistress. "I've just seen her around. We don't know each other personally?" Yes, that's the one. She doesn't eat anything." I don't know what to make her happy. Do you cook for her? What are you going to do with those silly kids? I used to know the Frasers' mother. I watched Max and Naomi grow up. I was a teenager then. We lived next door to each other. My mom used to help Olivia Pavlovna around the house. So I followed in her footsteps. Wait, where does Naomi live? She has an apartment on the waterfront. It's the one with the turrets, right under the roof. I usually go to her place in the evening, clean up, cook for 2 days, and she still forgets to eat. Max gets very angry. He loves his sister to bits. So that's it. Melanie muttered. She suddenly asked, Ariadne, tell me only without pretending. Do you love Max? Melanie frowned a strange question. Actually, we're friends. We've known each other since we were young, Melanie said. And then I had some family drama. Peter was there for me. But something doesn't add up in this story. What story? Ariadne tensed and immediately sat down on the chair next to Melanie. Melanie looked at the woman carefully. Since she had been working for Peter for 10 years, she should know a lot. But it was dangerous to trust her. How easily could she tell her master everything? It seems to me, Melanie continued, sighing, that Max has romantic feelings for me. And I'm completely confused, My husband cheated on me. And Peter and I met right after that, and he was very supportive, even invited me to live here so I could get used to my new life. But how could I say no to an old friend? Especially since we used to be very close. Strange, Ariadne said, as if she suspected something. Yes, and strange. It can't be a coincidence. Though I believe in fate. Back then, a long time ago, Peter was actively courting me. And I really liked him. But the boxing match decided everything, and I chose someone else. And it turns out I was wrong 20 years ago, because now I realize that I care about Peter deeply. A satisfied smile spread across Ariadne's face. She got up from her chair and patted Melanie on the shoulder. Don't worry, Melanie Nikolaevna. Max is a reliable man, and the fact that everything seems random, so it happens. We just don't see the whole picture. In the evening, when Ariadne left, Melanie sat and thought about Naomi. So this girl is not Peter's wife at all, but his sister. Melanie frowned. Yes, I remember when I was a student, he'd left a couple of times to take her somewhere, to pick her up. She was very young then, about 10 years old, no more. It's weird I didn't even remember my sister. But that's okay. Another thing, Melanie continued. Peter's wife died a few years ago. What's going on? Why would he pass his sister off as his wife? He's been making up stories. But more interestingly, what's Edward got to do with it? And where's Naomi gone? Or rather, why did she stop responding to Edward? This all looks very suspicious. I think I'm going to call Jessica. She must know something. Melanie dialed the private investigator's number immediately. She didn't answer for a long time, but finally her voice rang out. Melanie, to what do I owe at this late hour? Jessica wondered. Oh, I'm sorry. Melanie realized that the hands on the clock were past. I completely lost track of time. But it's very urgent. It can't wait until tomorrow. Jessica, you're the only one who can help. I need to get to the bottom of this. Oh, okay. Let me close the door so I don't wake my husband. Melanie was surprised that Jessica was married. This woman looked so confident and self-sufficient that it would be hard to imagine any man with her. So, Melanie Nikolaevna, what's the emergency? Jessica asked. Jessica, Melanie sighed. I will ask straight to the forehead, and no excuses about the secrecy of non-disclosure of information do not accept. She laughed. Given the circumstances, it's something involving my client. Yes, that would be Max Skvortsov. So I see he did get in touch with you. Not just out, Jessica. Melanie sighed deeply. I'm staying with him. How? The woman was stunned. Really? He's fast. He just broke up with his wife, and he hit on the wife of his abuser. He did. It's not that simple, Jessica. Can I be honest with you? Can I come to you as a client? In that case, would I have access to information from a previous investigation? Only if it directly relates to your case. Yes, it does. But why don't you let me come down tomorrow and we'll draw up a contract? Why don't you do that? I'll text you the office address. Would 11 o'clock be convenient? Yeah, that's fine. The next morning, Linda raced to Jessica's office. The detective was waiting for her in her office. So tell me, the woman stared at Linda. Tell me, are you aware that Naomi, the girl in the photo, is not Max Skvortsov's wife? Linda asked. What do you mean? The surprise on Jessica's face seemed genuine. And tell me you didn't even know Linda laughed. No, all the information on the client was given in a very metered way. That's what happens when the customer is a Skvortsov-type figure. He outlined everything to me, asked me to follow this woman, shoot, and so on. Digging into her past was not my job. I always follow instructions clearly. Reputation, is more important. I found out that Max's wife died a few years ago, and that girl Naomi is his little sister. That's news. Jessica whistled. Linda, it turns out that the situation is not as simple as it may seem. But why did Skvortsov mislead me? That's what I want to find out. You see, we've known each other since we were young. We went to school together. But then, how should I put it? Well, he was courting me in college. I liked Max, but I wasn't really interested in boys. I was studying hard. And then I met Edward. He started courting me right away. He and Max had a conflict over it. Although they were even friends at the time, and they were both boxing at the time. Edward won me back. Max and I pretty much stopped talking. And then I transferred to a correspondence school. I got married. And then I forgot all about it. So much for motive. Jessica glared triumphantly. God be with you. What motive? It's been so long, and there'd be something to remember. Men are very vulnerable. They can remember an insult for years, even decades. And if he loved you, he could have been plotting revenge on Edward for years. And he subconsciously wanted revenge even when his wife died. Something could have clicked in his head. That's when he went into action, Linda said. Maybe he saw you two together somewhere or something. So you're saying that Max deliberately set this whole thing up? Jessica shook her head. I'm not saying anything. It's too early to tell. But we can check it out. Where is he now? He went to Phoenix. He won't be back for 4 days. Naomi is, according to the housekeeper, living in a tower house on the waterfront. Edward also told me that she hasn't returned his calls since I kicked him out the door. That's interesting. All right, let's check it out. All right, I'll get to work today. And tell me what the housekeeper said. How did you get her to have this conversation? I just saw this woman. Ariadne, if I'm not mistaken, looks like a guard dog. Yeah, we just happened to be talking. She asked me if I had feelings for Max. And also her question seemed very strange. And I put it all in a joke, even not in a joke, but I avoided a direct answer. She's been in the family a long time. She's bound to tell the boss. Yeah, I don't think we should trust her. I don't like this whole situation. How come you're living with him now? I talked him into it. He said it's hard for both of us, and that it'll be easier for us to cope together. Only I realize it's not as hard for him as it is for me. Yeah, obviously. Be careful with Ariadne. Don't say anything or give away your suspicions about Skvortsov. I'll call you as soon as I have any information. Do we have a deal? Linda nodded. I'll be in touch. And went outside. It was raining. The car was parked quite far away, and the woman had to get a little wet. Already sitting in the cabin, she suddenly thought of the locked rooms in Max's apartment. Once again, curiosity got the better of her. Linda hurried home, not knowing if Ariadne would be there. She wasn't expecting her housekeeper today, but she could come whenever she wanted. Who knows if Max asked her to watch Melanie, Linda thought. The house was quiet. Melanie called out the housekeeper's name several times, but there was no answer, only an echo. Then Melanie ran up the stairs. Her intuition told her that there was something in these rooms, but she needed to get inside. She pulled the knob. The doors to both rooms were locked with standard door locks, but the keys to the adjoining bedroom didn't fit. Melanie scrutinized the mechanism and figured out what she could use to open it. She searched the kitchen drawers for something thin and sharp. An ice pick, some kind of screwdriver, and meat forks were her choices. With trembling hands, Melanie tried to pick the lock. The mechanism would not budge. In desperation, she struck the handle of the screwdriver with all her might. There was a click. The handle slid smoothly down and a gap appeared between the door and the jamb. Bingo. Melanie almost screamed with joy. And immediately she entered the room. It was pitch black inside. Melanie tried to find the light switch, but it was nowhere to be found. When her eyes became accustomed to the darkness, she reached the window and pulled the thick curtains. The room was completely empty. Damn, Melanie muttered resentfully. Why lock it then? And the other one was the same. Probably here too, but the renovations aren't finished yet, are they? No, it can't be. My intuition has never failed me. Melanie went out and immediately started picking the lock on the second door. It worked faster this time. The latch clicked. She entered the room and went straight to the window, but on the way she hit her foot on something. The woman grabbed the bruised area and dropped the phone. The phone clattered to the concrete floor. Snapping out of her self-pity, Melanie still made her way to the window. Instead of drapes, dense rolls of curtains covered the glass. She had to look for a lifting chain, but there was none. So the woman manually lifted the fabric and turned around. The curtain immediately fell out of her hands, and the room was plunged back into darkness. What the hell is going on in here? Melanie whispered, trying to lift the curtain again. This time she secured it by the window handle. Light streamed through the window, revealing itself to Melanie. The walls were covered with pictures. The nearsighted woman did not immediately realize that all of the pictures showed her at different times in her life. Some had Edward or Ashley next to her. Melanie walked up to one of the walls and noticed something that looked like an altar at the bottom. On a small table were some candles, or rather floating candles, and dried chamomile flowers, her favorite. And there was a framed photograph. From it, Melanie was looking at a woman like 2 drops of water, similar to her, but different. Melanie took the picture to get a better look at it and immediately felt a sharp pain. Something heavy descended on her head. The next moment she was unconscious. Melanie woke up with pain all over her body. She tried to get up but couldn't. She could only lift her head. Her hands and feet were bound tightly, and she was lying on the bed in the master bedroom. "Are you awake?" Melanie heard Ariadne's familiar voice. "What's going on? Why did you tie me up?" Curiosity killed the cat. The housekeeper laughed hoarsely. "You shouldn't have gone there. Everything was fine." "What was? Why are my pictures there? Are you with Peter?" "I am." "Melanie, don't jump to conclusions. You've misinterpreted everything. Let me go right now." "No way. I can't make decisions like that. When Max gets back, he'll untie you himself. He's the one who asked me to suspend your mobility." "What's this all about? You still don't get it, do you?" "But nothing. Who is that woman in the framed photo? She looks just like me." "That's the late Rachel. You were right to point out that it seems Max was looking for a wife to remind him of his true love." "What the hell are you talking about, Ariadne? Be a human being." "You realize you're committing a crime," Melanie said. "Don't make it worse. Scream all you want. It's so noiseless in here, you'll only ruin your voice. Besides, no one knows you're here, and they won't come to help you." "I have to go to the bathroom. I see 2 doors. Do you know where the front door is? I'm telling you, you can't run anywhere, and you can't get your hands free. Don't even try, you'll only damage your skin. Sit tight. I'll bring you something to eat later." Ariadne untied Melanie's legs. She immediately tried to kick her probation worker, but was immediately knocked to the floor. "Don't be silly," Melanie Ariadne growled threateningly. "You can't handle me. Don't even try. If you misbehave, I'll punish you. I have the authority to do that." The housekeeper gave Melanie an angry look in the eye and left the bedroom, locking the door behind her. Melanie felt completely helpless. Her hands were securely and professionally tied behind her back. After the meal Ariadne had brought, Melanie had a strong urge to sleep. She literally passed out. How long her sleep lasted was hard to say. but the woman woke up when she felt someone intensely shaking her by the shoulders and slapping her cheeks. "Melanie, wake up, wake up," she heard a disembodied voice. Her husband's face appeared through the veil before her eyes. "Edward," Melanie mumbled, trying to open her eyes. "Why are you screaming like that? I had such a nightmare." "She's alive," Edward shouted happily to someone. At once, some people were running around Melanie. They gave her a sniff of ammonia, and her consciousness cleared immediately. "Jesus," she shuddered, rubbing her rope-scarred wrists. The welts made it clear that the ropes weren't part of the dream. "What's going on?" Melanie asked. "Are you all right?" Edward said worriedly. "If it hadn't been for Jessica, I don't know what would have happened." "Jessica?" Melanie's eyes widened in bewilderment. "Yes, that woman saved you. She found out all about Peter, and when she couldn't reach you a few times, she realized what had happened. She dug up something. Yeah, he's literally obsessed with you." "Naomi told me everything," Edward said. "She was the one who gave us the keys to this apartment. Otherwise, Ariadne wouldn't have let us in. Jessica called me and a couple of other tough guys, but now she's going through the old channels to contact the police. Peter's been picked up in Phoenix for trying to kidnap you. But I think he and his money are going to get away with it. Let's get out of here before he turns it around. That Ariadne is a loyal soldier. She's ready to take the blame." "But what is the meaning of all this?" Melanie frowned. "I don't understand." "That's what it means. Peter held a grudge against you 20 years ago and spent his whole life trying to get revenge. But he wasn't going to break up with you. He was smart enough to destroy what you had first. He sent Ashley. He was blackmailing her, intimidating her. So she went along with it. She charmed me on purpose. I was a fool to fall for it. But that's not the point. He'd been working on it for a long time, meticulously watching every move. And it all worked out beautifully. And it would have kept going. Just when you got to the housekeeper's room, he thought you suspected something and called him right away. Oh, he's a bastard." Melanie burst into tears with resentment. She couldn't tell whether it was the carefully planned operation or her own naivete that had made her more angry. "It looks like he's going to get away with this," she said. "I'm not sure," Edward said. "I'll get a good lawyer. Jessica already recommended one. They say he's a good one to try for another case. His ex-wife didn't leave the world willingly. He only married her because she looked like you. She found some old photos of you and started asking questions. That's when he went crazy. Ashley's intimidated by him. She's willing to testify against him. Naomi, too. She's been through a lot, too. I'm afraid she's only saying that for now." "It's okay. You and I will go far away where he can't get to us," Melanie said. "We will." "I'm sorry, and I'll do my best not to disappoint you again." "Let's go," Edward said. Melanie hugged her husband tightly. "Let's leave right now. I forgave you a long time ago, you fool. Do you really love me?" The man's face contorted with surprise. "Of course I love you. If you didn't love me, you would have divorced me." Edward took her in his arms and carried her out of the bedroom. He walked slowly down the stairs and headed for the exit. Melanie stared at her husband without taking her eyes off him. She didn't even notice the men in black tracksuits holding the bound housekeeper. Didn't notice Jessica shaking her head and smiling. Didn't notice anything. Her whole body went light. All she could see were the lights of the Capitol and Edward, his cheeks wet with tears. The plane landed softly on the runway, and a sigh of relief swept through the cabin. Passengers nervously glanced at their smartphone screens, not sharing the general joy of landing. Anxious thoughts swirled in their heads. What if I'm doing something stupid? What if they don't like my surprise? Brianna was already regretting her impulse to cancel an important business meeting and take the first flight to the Capitol. Of course, Vincent and his parents didn't know she was coming. Brianna planned to surprise them by showing up on their doorstep with a bouquet of flowers and a big smile. The wedding was less than a month away, and she hadn't seen her overseas relatives yet. Brianna took a deep breath, trying to calm her excitement. It's going to be okay. After all, they're staying at my house, she coaxed herself. After retrieving her luggage and passing through the green customs corridor, Brianna stepped into the spacious airport hall. The bright light cut her eyes, accustomed to the semi-darkness of the cabin. People were bustling around, announcements in different languages, wheeled suitcases humming. There was a noisy and bustling atmosphere everywhere. She looked out for the cab car that had been called in advance. When she spotted it in the distance, she headed for the exit. The driver of 50 years old in a strict suit deftly maneuvered between the hurrying passengers and helped to put the suitcases in the trunk. "Hello," he said, opening the door. "Is this 23 Clinton Street?" Yes, Brianna smiled, settling into the back seat. The car started smoothly, and soon the airport and its hustle and bustle were behind them. Brianna closed her eyes and leaned back against the seat. The prospect of meeting Vincent and his parents was both frightening and exhilarating. The car glided gently through the city streets, shrouded in a sheet of heat. The sun's rays broke through the foliage of the trees, casting whimsical patterns on the asphalt. Brianna couldn't contain her excitement, peering anxiously out the window. "Nervous?" the driver asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Are you going to visit, I suppose?" Well, you could say that Brianna answered evasively, not wanting to go into details. The turnoff to Clinton Street was coming up. She smiled involuntarily, remembering how eagerly she had counted the days until this meeting. My future in-laws, Brianna thought fondly. The wedding wasn't long away, and they couldn't wait to meet Vincent's chosen one. Of course, she could have postponed the trip, but she'd received a very lucrative job offer she couldn't refuse. Besides, the trip to Milan would pay her a handsome fee. The bride decided to combine pleasant and useful to earn money and buy a luxurious gift for Vincent. During their separation, the lovers called each other several times a day, exchanging tender messages and photos. Vincent never tired of repeating how much he missed his kitty. "Here we are," the cab driver interrupted her thoughts, pulling the car to a stop at the curb. Brianna paid and got out of the cab and looked around the familiar courtyard. Stepping on the hot asphalt, the sun dazzled her for a moment. It was as if it decided to test her strength, bringing down all its power on the city. The chill from the cab's air conditioning had already dissipated, and the weightless silk blouse clung unpleasantly to her back. "That's okay," she thought. "Just a couple more minutes, and I'll be home." Thoughts of the long-awaited coolness and her upcoming meeting with Vincent were energizing. Brianna smiled at her thoughts and headed for the wicket. She was already imagining how she would tell her fiancé about the trip, about the contract that promised her dizzying success, and the gifts she had chosen for him with the utmost care. The house shone with the whiteness of fresh paint. The windows were hospitably open. Visiting came the voices. She went quietly to the window to surprise them, and was about to call out to the guests when suddenly the words that flew before her made her freeze in place. It was not her native tongue, but another, vaguely familiar from her travels abroad. Brianna listened, trying to catch the familiar sounds. Suddenly a hunch flashed through her brain like lightning. She said something about the house, the money, the safe. The voices grew louder and louder. Brianna realized with horror that they belonged to a man and a woman speaking broken Russian, with a distinctly foreign accent. "Such a nice house," the woman said, her voice filled with obvious envy. "And it's all ours now," whispered the man. "But it's not time to rejoice yet. We have to find the safe. Vincent said she had jewelry and money in there." Brianna felt her legs go stiff. She leaned against the wall, trying to keep her balance. Her head was spinning and her ears were ringing unpleasantly. Who were these people? What were they doing in her house? What if she had already returned? The woman's voice came again. "Don't worry," the man said calmly. "We still have time." "Yes," he said. "She wouldn't be back for 2 days at the earliest." Vincent. 2 days. The words echoed in Brianna's mind like a church bell. She felt nausea rising in her throat, but she forced herself to control herself. She needed to make sense of all of this. Brianna took a step back, trying not to make a sound. She had to see these people, to face them. Cautiously walking around the house, she peered through the living room window. And what she saw made her heart clench with pain and fear. There was a man sitting in her favorite chair with his leg over his leg. He was dressed in an expensive suit, which, however, sat on him awkwardly, as if he was used to wearing other clothes. and standing next to him was a woman, about the same age, around 50. Brianna recognized her as the woman she'd seen in Vincent's photographs. It was his mother. "I don't understand why you called him," she asked indignantly, turning sharply toward the man. "What if he was trying to deceive us?" "Yes, nonsense," he laughed. "Vincent won't fool us. He knows what will happen if he doesn't fulfill the terms of his agreement." Brianna was petrified. She couldn't believe her ears. Vincent is her Vincent. Could he really be capable of such a thing? Had he been deceiving her all this time? Her mind raced with memories the first time they'd met, the first kiss, the tender words and vows of love. Was it all a lie? Brianna took a deep breath, trying to stop the trembling in her knees. "Okay, calm down," she whispered. She needed to pull herself together. Panic was definitely not necessary right now. After another glance around the cozy living room, flooded with the warm light of the setting sun, Brianna turned the doorknob with determination and stepped inside. The woman she'd seen in Vincent's photographs turned at the sound of her footsteps. The man, sipping leisurely from a crystal glass, turned to look at her. "Oh, you must be Brianna," the woman said with a slight accent, eyeing her with an appraising gaze. "Vincent has told us so much about you." Brianna forced herself to smile. "Yes, that's me. You must be Charles and Charlotte," she said to the couple, trying to keep her voice smooth and casual. "Vincent has told me a lot about you, too." He, as the man nodded, rising from his chair. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," Brianna said. Inwardly, she shuddered at the falsity of it. She felt like an actress playing a part in a poorly staged play. "I'm sorry to drop in," Ewan announced, she continued, trying to sound as natural as possible. "Vincent was away on business for a few days, and I thought I'd surprise him." "Surprise?" Charlotte asked, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Without warning?" "Yes," Brianna confirmed, trying to ignore her suspicious tone. "I thought it would be nice to spend some time together, to get to know each other." Of course," Charles muttered, rubbing his chin. "That's very thoughtful of you." The atmosphere in the room thickened like storm clouds. Brianna could feel the heavy stares of the guests, and it made her uncomfortable. "Would you like some tea?" she suggested to lighten the mood. "That's a good idea," Charles responded eagerly, especially since Charlotte and I had bought a cake. Brianna took a breath of relief. She hurried into the kitchen, trying not to show her excitement as the kettle boiled. Brianna pulled from the cupboard the beautiful set she and Vincent had received as a housewarming gift from friends. Carefully placing the cups on the tray, she poured the boiling water and returned to the living room. "Please come to the table." She invited the guests in, trying to smile openly, without implication. "Vincent tells me you're a real businessman, doesn't he?" Brianna began, turning to Charles. "Moved overseas about 20 years ago." You could say that the man grinned, squaring his shoulders proudly. "I've devoted many years to this business. And what do you do?" He turned to Charlotte, who had been watching Brianna silently from beneath half-lowered lashes. "I am," Charlotte said, as if awake from her thoughts. "I am the keeper of the family home," she announced proudly. "I make sure that the house is in order, and that my husband and son have everything they need." "Yes, that's important," Brianna nodded gravely. She felt a twinge in her heart at the words. She tried hard not to show her true feelings. She knew it was important to stay calm and not make any sudden moves. It was necessary to buy time and develop a plan of action. "How long have you been in our city?" Brianna asked. "Pour yourself some more tea," Charles said. "We just got here today. We thought we'd visit our son, surprise him." His words sounded ambiguous. Brianna felt a chill run down her spine. Something's not right here, she thought, glancing warily at her guests. "How do you like it?" she asked, trying to pick up on any falsehood in their voices. "It's very nice," Charlotte exclaimed, looking around the living room. Appreciative glance, cozy, tasteful. "Vincent knows a thing or two about living beautifully," Charles added, stroking the armrest of the leather sofa. Brianna remained silent, trying to hold back her growing irritation. "Where is Vincent?" Charles asked. "I can't wait to hug my son and ask him about his life." "He'll be back soon," Brianna answered evasively, her heart racing. She could feel the tension in her shoulders and the uneasy feeling in her chest. The words of Vincent's parents had left an unpleasant residue in her soul. Brianna began to clear the dishes from the table to distract herself from her thoughts. "Let me help," Charlotte suddenly offered, rising from the couch. Brianna flinched. "No need, I'll do it myself," she said hastily. "Don't be shy," she said, smiling. "I can see you're nervous." "Don't worry, we're not strangers." Her words sounded friendly, but for some reason Brianna sensed a falseness. "Thank you," she said with a strained smile. "I'll do it myself. Rest up. Shall I make you some coffee?" she suggested, to change the subject. "Yes, I suppose so," Charles nodded. "Just stronger," Charlotte added. "Of course," Brianna said, and hurried off to the kitchen. "Please," she smiled a few minutes later, pouring coffee into cups. "Thank you," Charles said, taking a sip. "Great." Charlotte was silently watching Brianna at that moment. She tried to ignore her hard stare. "Tell me about your home," she said to Vincent's parents. Charlotte brightened up. "Our house is very special," she exclaimed. "We designed it ourselves. We put our hearts and souls into it. It has a cozy living room with a fireplace, a spacious kitchen, and the garden. You can't imagine what roses grow there." Charlotte described her house with enthusiasm. Brianna listened, trying not to show her excitement. Her thoughts involuntarily returned to the day she had first met her. It had only been 2 months, but it seemed like an eternity. Brianna had participated in a charity event organized for the orphanage. She herself offered her help, because holidays are always a joy. And children deprived of parental warmth want something new and unusual. Besides, Brianna has always loved children. She had no brothers or sisters. She was the only daughter of rich parents and grew up surrounded by the care and attention of numerous nannies and governesses. But nothing can replace the warmth of a child's home, family traditions, and noisy children's games. That day, many guests gathered in the orphanage. Volunteers decorated the hall with balloons and bright garlands. Animators entertained the children with games and contests. Brianna was watching this cheerful bustle when suddenly someone touched her shoulder lightly. "Excuse me." A pleasant male voice sounded nearby. "Can we go through?" Brianna turned around and saw a tall, dark-haired stranger standing in front of her. He was smiling, and the smile was so open that she smiled back. "Yes, of course," Brianna said, and stepped aside to let him and the woman standing next to him pass, holding a large gift. "Thank you," the man nodded. "I'm Vincent, and this is my assistant Isabella. We've decided to join the festivities today, too." "Brianna," she introduced herself. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Vincent set the fruit basket he was holding on the floor and handed her his card. "If you need any help, you're welcome," he said. She took the cardboard and read with surprise, "Vincent Charles, chairman of a charitable foundation." "You have your own foundation?" Brianna asked, perplexed. "Yes," Vincent smiled. "We help orphans and those without parental care." "That's great," Brianna said. "I've always wanted to do charity work." "Well, then we should get to know each other better," Vincent laughed. "Tell me, how did you come up with such a wonderful idea?" They talked for a few more minutes, and then Isabella came up to them and, apologizing, drew Vincent along with her. Brianna watched them go and felt a new, unfamiliar feeling in her soul. No, not love, but sympathy. Their relationship had truly begun with one phone call. Brianna was then trying to organize the delivery of groceries to a nursing home where elderly people who were deprived of help from loved ones lived. Normally, there was no problem with that. But this time, the regular supplier had let her down at the last minute. Maybe we should call Vincent. A stray thought flashed through her mind, and Brianna hesitated a moment. Brianna found his number in her contacts. "Hello, Vincent?" she asked. Vincent's voice had a warmth and energy that she could feel even over the phone. "Brianna, it's good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" Brianna, a little embarrassed, explained her predicament. "Don't panic," Vincent laughed, and she imagined his warm smile. "I think the problem has been solved. I have a friend who does transportation. I'll give you his number, tell him it's from me, and he'll arrange it." Indeed, in half an hour the problem was solved. Unbelieving her luck, Brianna dialed Vincent to thank him. "Don't mention it," he said. "It's nothing to me. By the way, I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me some night." As a token of appreciation for my helpfulness, he added hastily when he heard the silence on the other end of the line. Brianna felt a blush come to her cheeks. "Dinner?" "Yes, of course," she mumbled, struggling to control her excitement. "Good." Vincent exclaimed happily. "How about tomorrow night?" "Tomorrow will be wonderful," Brianna said, feeling her heart racing. The next day dragged on endlessly. She couldn't concentrate on her work and kept adjusting her outfit, practicing a relaxed smile in front of the mirror. She couldn't wait to see Vincent, to hear his voice again, to drown in his warm gaze. Finally, the long-awaited evening arrived. Vincent came to pick her up in a cab. He was dressed in an austere suit that didn't hide his athletic figure. "You look ravishing," he said as he got out of the car and opened the door gallantly for her. His words sounded not a banal compliment, but sincere admiration. Dinner was at a cozy place with live music. Vincent was an interesting conversationalist. He talked a lot about his foundation, how it helped children, and his plans for the future. Brianna listened with bated breath. She was impressed by his kindness, determination, sense of humor. She realized that she was falling in love more and more every minute. After dinner, Vincent drove her home. "Thank you for such a lovely evening," Brianna said as they pulled up in front of the house. "It was my pleasure." "It was my pleasure," too, Vincent smiled, looking at her with a gentle gaze. He walked her to the door of the apartment. "Why don't you come in for a cup of coffee?" Brianna suggested hesitantly, not wanting to part so soon. "I'd love to," Vincent said, a mysterious glint in his eyes. Brianna smiled as she thought back to that night. She hadn't known then that it would be the beginning of their beautiful love story. Brianna was brought out of her sad thoughts by her phone vibrating with a new message. She grabbed it, hoping it was Vincent. Her heart froze in anticipation. "Sorry, darling, can't make it today. The meeting got delayed. I didn't realize you'd already arrived. I'll be there by lunch tomorrow. Kisses." Disappointment washed over her in an icy wave. "Tomorrow, lunch." Brianna reread the message again, as if hoping the words would magically change. But no, there was no miracle. Vincent wouldn't be in until tomorrow. She got up from the table. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'm going to get some rest," Sandra said. "I feel exhausted. Tired today, to be honest." Of course, go and rest," Charlotte said, keeping her eyes on the phone screen. Brianna nodded and, trying not to trip, headed for the exit. "Good night," she said from the hallway. "Good night, Brianna." Charles's cheerful voice came after her. She was tired, but she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts jumbled in her head, turning into heavy, shapeless images. She took a relaxing bath, hoping the warm water would help calm her down, but nothing worked. The anxiety that had been brewing inside her since the afternoon continued to grow, turning into panic. "What's happening to me?" she asked herself, looking at her reflection in the mirror. Her face seemed alien. Her eyes glittered feverishly. Only this affair with him would give Brianna thought, trying to convince herself that there was nothing wrong. She put on a light nightgown and lay in bed, hoping that she would still be able to fall asleep. But as soon as she closed her eyes, she felt dizzy. The room spun around her, and the walls seemed to be closing in, threatening to crush her. "What is it?" Brianna whispered, clutching at the sheet with her hands. The next moment she heard voices. They came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Whispering something unintelligible and frightening, and you can't hold it in. One voice whispered, "He's not for you. Yes, he will be ours." Echoed another, rougher and nastier, "He will come back to us." Brianna put her hands over her ears, trying not to listen, but the voices kept coming stronger and stronger and stronger in her head, as if trying to enter her mind and take over her thoughts. A cold, clammy fear gripped her heart. Brianna felt hot tears running down her cheeks. She didn't understand what was happening to her, but she knew she was in danger. When she awoke in the morning, Brianna felt heavy in every cell of her body, as if she'd been carrying cobblestones all night. Her head was buzzing, her temples thumping, and gray flies danced before my eyes. Flu, maybe, she thought sluggishly. With difficulty, she uncurled her eyelids. The room around her was blurring. Objects seemed alien and blurry. She tried to remember what she had dreamt about the night before. The memory fluttered away like a startled bird, leaving behind only a vague unease. "Brianna, are you awake?" "My goodness," she said, as if a light breeze was blowing from the room. Charlotte came in. Her voice, which had seemed melodious and tender yesterday, was now a false note that sent shivers down her spine. "Good morning, Charlotte," Brianna said hoarsely, trying to sit up on the bed. She felt dizzy and collapsed helplessly on the pillow. "Oh, you poor thing," Charlotte fussed, adjusting the blanket. "You seem ill. Your face is pale and your eyes glisten unhealthily." She put the back of her hand to Brianna's forehead. She did. "Fever." Charles, Charlotte shouted, turning to her husband at the door. A second later, Vincent's father appeared in the room, wearing a house robe and looking confused. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, his eyebrows furrowed in a frown. "Brianna seems to be sick. We have to go to the pharmacy and get some medicine." Charlotte fidgeted with her lace handkerchief. "Why a doctor?" Sandra protested languidly. "Maybe it's just a common cold. Will it go away on its own?" No, darling. It's not something to be trifled with." Charlotte cut her off. "It's better to be safe. I'm always in favor of not self-medicating." Charles glanced at his daughter with a quick look of alarm and something else elusive but no less frightening. Brianna tried to focus her gaze on Charlotte, but she was blurring into a caricature of a caring mommy. Reassurance. Self-medicate, those words echoed in her head, causing a cold sense of unease. No, really, what nonsense. Brianna's voice sounded surprisingly weak, as if through absorbent cotton. "Charlotte, I'll call my doctor. He always gives good advice." Brianna began to feel the space around her, the bedside table, the pillows, the blankets. But the smartphone was gone. "I put your phone away," dearie. Charlotte's smile didn't reach her eyes, leaving them cold and calculating. "Why would you strain your eyesight like that? Rest. Charles and I will take care of everything." "But my doctor." The words stuck in Brianna's throat as if someone had cut off her oxygen. The room began to spin at a terrifying speed. The walls shrank, turning into a trap. "This is wrong. This is all wrong," flashed through Brianna's mind before she fell into the pulling darkness. How much time had passed, she didn't know. She fell into a heavy, clammy sleep, then came to her senses again. She saw the world around her in fragments, as if through dusty glass. Brianna could vaguely make out the silhouettes of people coming in and out of the room. Charlotte, with plates filled with something unsightly, gray in color and bad smelling, and a scowling Charles muttering to himself. "Where is he? Why isn't he around?" throbbed a dull ache in her head during rare bouts of clarity. Brianna decided to call Vincent by all means. "Charlotte," Rachel whispered with difficulty moving her lips. The woman was beside the bed in a flash, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Yes, sweetheart, what did you want?" "A phone. Give me the phone, please. I need to make a call. To Vincent." Charlotte's face petrified for a moment, but then her features smoothed out again. A sweet, sweet smile played on her lips. "Vincent's on a business trip, dear. You said so yourself, remember?" "I don't remember." Brianna struggled to gather her thoughts. "But I need to talk to him. It's very important." "Come on, sweetheart. What's a phone in your condition?" Charlotte sat down on the edge of the bed, took Brianna's hand in her icy palms. "You need to rest, regain your strength. When you're better, you can talk to Vincent as much as you like." Brianna closed her eyes helplessly, her heart pounding frantically, spreading anxiety through her body. Vincent, where is he? Why isn't he answering his cell phone? Why is Charlotte acting so strangely? Yesterday, before Brianna had felt sick, everything had been different. And then there was this weird weakness, dizziness, and Charlotte and Charles like kites hovering over her bed. It can't be. It's crazy, Sandra whispered, trying to push away the terrible speculation. But the more she thought, the clearer the frightening truth became. The rich heiress was being held here by force, and before that she had been generously fed the poison that had soaked into the cake. But why? What did they want? Brianna felt her mouth dry nervously. Scraps of phrases she'd heard in her half-awake state rattled around in her head. Money. Inheritance. Not allowed, our family. Did Vincent have anything to do with this? Pain squeezed her chest. There was no way Vincent could be involved in this. He loves her. Brianna knew that for a fact. Or was this just a skillful game? Suddenly she remembered her phone. Charlotte had taken it away under the pretext of Brianna not feeling well. We need to get it back. We need to call someone, flashed through Brianna's mind. But how? She looked around. The room. The door was locked. Second-floor windows facing the street. Dead end, she thought with despair. Tears came to her throat, threatening to burst out. But she knew not to panic. She had to pull herself together, figure out how to get out of this trap. At some point her gaze fell on a small table by the window. On it were a pen and a notebook. Charlotte apparently paid no attention to it. A note of life-saving thought flashed through her mind. Brianna wrote, making sure her handwriting was legible. Help. I am being held here by force. Then, just in case, she gave the address of the house and threw it through the open window without hesitation. It was picked up by a gust of wind, swirled in the air like a frightened bird, and fell smoothly to the sidewalk near the feet of a boy of about 8 years old. Oscar Few pulled the leash of the child, trying to pull the shaggy dog away from the paper. He flared up in displeasure, but obediently moved away, continuing to look longingly at the fallen prey. The boy bent down and picked up the note, scratching it with his reddish fingers. Oscar reread the note again. His face, chubby as a child, with funny freckles on his nose, became serious. Grandmother used to say you shouldn't read other people's letters, he muttered under his breath, rubbing the leash in his hands. But this isn't a letter, is it? Oscar, it's someone who needs help. The dog, as if realizing the importance of the moment, wagged his tail and licked his master's hand. That's what I think is important, the child said firmly, shoving the message into his pocket. Something must be done. At the same moment he remembered old Deborah, who lived across the street. She had always said that Oscar was a real man and should protect the weak, and who was weaker than this stranger languishing in confinement. Right, Oscar? Nodded the boy, heading toward the familiar entranceway. Deborah would know exactly what to do. There's a girl being held there by force. About the highway smells, Oscar, the faithful companion, looked faithfully into the boy's eyes as if to say, yes, that's what happened. Deborah, a short, thin woman with a kind but somewhat stern face, listened attentively without interrupting. Her gray hair, always neatly arranged in a bundle, was a little disheveled today, giving away her excitement. Oscar knew that Deborah didn't like to be disturbed over nothing, but today was different. Grandmother was holding a piece of paper in her hands, scribbled in uneven, hurried handwriting. Oscar had brought her the note he had found on the street, and now he waited impatiently for her reaction. Help. I'm being held here by force. The address Deborah read aloud, frowning her eyebrows, then affectionately patted the boy on the head. All right, Oscar, I believe you. You're a serious boy, you won't make things up. It's just an unusual situation, but we have to do something. Oscar couldn't wait to do something. He already saw himself as a hero, rescuing the beautiful lady from the clutches of villains. Yes, Deborah reassured him. First, we need to think it over. She put the note on the table and pushed the cup with the cooled tea toward her. Oscar waited patiently, stroking the dog's head. He had met his grandmother a few years ago when the family had moved into the house. She lived alone, and her only son, Henry, a talented surgeon, had long ago moved to another city. It was rumored that he'd had a fight with his mother and hadn't spoken to her in years. Oscar enjoyed coming to visit Deborah, especially after he learned that the boy's mother had died 2 years ago of pneumonia. He lived with an alcoholic stepfather who drank everything he could get his hands on, from furniture to child support. Deborah always treated Oscar to delicious tea and cookies, told him interesting stories from her life, and never scolded him for fidgeting in his chair and asking a million questions. Deborah was also a real treasure trove of knowledge. After all, she used to work as a teacher of Russian language and literature at school. Now that she was retired, she was happy to tutor Oscar, helping him learn the finer points of grammar and spelling. Oscar was shy at first, but Deborah knew how to find an approach to children. She did not scold him for mistakes, but patiently explained how to write and speak better. "So you think we should help this stranger?" Deborah asked, sipping her tea. "Of course," Oscar exclaimed. "What if she's being beaten, starved? Maybe some villains?" Deborah smiled. Oscar's imagination was working well. "Well, let's not exaggerate," she said. "But you're right, inaction is unacceptable. Shouldn't we call the police?" "The police?" Deborah thought. That would be the most obvious option, of course. But what if there's some kind of mistake? There's no telling what could have happened. And then what to do? But first, Deborah said with a sly smile, we could do a little investigation of our own. The boy's eyes lit up. Now that's something else. Wow, a real investigation. How are we going to do it? Oscar asked. The dog, as if realizing the importance of the moment, wagged his tail happily. Quiet, quiet, Deborah smiled. The neighbors will hear. They'll think we're having a secret meeting. Oscar could hardly refrain from shouting about his new adventure to the whole apartment. He was already imagining how he and his grandmother would solve the mystery of the note and rescue the unfortunate woman. Pictures of dangerous chases, secret ciphers, and of course the victory of good over evil were swarming in his head. Don't get too excited, Deborah shook her head reproachfully. I think we should go to an old acquaintance of mine. He was a police officer. He's seen a lot of things in his life. I'm sure he can help us get to the bottom of this story. Oliver, Oscar whispered, as if tasting the name. I wonder if he'll help, Oscar said. Oliver Goryunov was an old friend of Deborah's who lived in a neighboring house. Oscar didn't see him very often. A tall, trim man with a network of thick wrinkles on his face and his trademark ironic smile. Oliver had once worked for the police force, and Deborah often consulted him on various matters. Deborah's grandmother had always said he had a sharp mind and could unravel any story, even the most convoluted. Oscar remembered her words and smiled involuntarily, imagining Oliver in uniform with a gun on his belt. Solving complex crimes at his age was easy to give any adult, especially one as statuesque and confident as Oliver, a heroic halo. That said, Oscar couldn't escape the feeling that there was more behind this visit than just a desire to consult with the ex-cop. Deborah is always trying to control everything, the boy reasoned to himself. She's very clever calculating. Does she really want to go to him just for a note? The boy shook his head. No, something didn't add up. He'd noticed Deborah blush more than once when Oliver was near her. The way her gaze warmed, her voice softer. And Oscar had also heard whispers from the neighborhood grandmothers sitting on the bench at the entrance that Deborah had a thing for Oliver. Maybe they really are in love, Oscar thought. He found the thought both frightening and exciting at the same time. What a story that would be. He imagined Deborah, always so stern and collected, blushing and embarrassed around Oliver, walking together in the park, holding hands, and how he, Oscar, would witness their affair. It doesn't make sense, he mumbled aloud, as if he wanted to push the thoughts away. Deborah was too serious for such nonsense. And Oliver, he's an ex-cop. Did he need that kind of tenderness? But in spite of his attempts to dissuade himself, Oscar had his doubts. Something about his grandmother's behavior was bothering Oscar. All right, we'll figure it out on the spot, he decided, rising from his chair. The main thing now was to help that woman. He shoved the note firmly into his pocket and headed for the door to let Deborah know he was ready. After all, the investigation wouldn't run itself, and curiosity was eating him up inside. Oliver listened to Deborah and Oscar's story without interrupting. Only his thick gray eyebrows rose in surprise, and sly lights danced in his eyes. I didn't expect it, he said. A test of strength went behind his ear. So someone in this house needs help. But the note. Deborah began. A note is not proof, the ex-cop interrupted her. You didn't catch her at the scene of the crime, so to speak. Maybe the girl just had a fight with someone and decided to make a joke of it. Young people these days, you know. But the house is surrounded by a high fence. Oscar didn't stop. I saw it myself. The boy has a good point, Deborah said. Oliver shook his lips thoughtfully. On the one hand, he was inclined to think that the whole story was a silly fabrication. But on the other, what if there really was something wrong in this house? The landlady really didn't have the best reputation. And intuition told the retired policeman that not everything was so simple in this story. All right, he sighed at last. It's a deal. Let's go and see your prisoner. Just like a neighbor. See if anyone needs help. Brianna's house was a 2-story red brick mansion surrounded by a high fence with bars, like a prison. Spooky, Oscar whispered, looking anxiously at the building. Deborah didn't say anything, but there was worry in her eyes too. Oliver pressed the bell button without seeming to notice. The door didn't open right away. First there was a rustle, as if someone were hesitating in the hallway. Then there was a creak of old hinges, and Charlotte appeared on the threshold. Oscar's eyes widened in surprise. What a surprise! And Deborah even gasped quietly. How did you end up here? Charlotte asked. We're looking for a girl. I think she owns the house. The woman froze on the threshold. Brianna's face? She muttered, biting her lip. She's not here. She left a long time ago. Oliver squinted, scrutinizing the stranger. Something about the way she spoke seemed strange, strained, as if she were trying hard to maintain a semblance of calm. But inside her, she was seething with anxiety. Gone? He asked, slowly giving himself time to put the pieces of this strange puzzle together. Where did she go, if it was no secret? And when would she be back? Charlotte shook her head negatively, still not looking up. I don't know about Brianna. She's gone far away and won't be back soon. Maybe she won't come back at all. That's odd, Oliver grumbled. So she didn't say anything to anyone. She just disappeared. A man's voice came from the back of the house. Charlotte, who are you talking to? The next instant, a man Oliver had never seen before appeared in the doorway. Tall, thickly built, with stiff, stubble-like gray hair and unkind gray eyes, he gave the impression of an overbearing and implacable man. Who is this? He said sharply, giving the two men a hard stare. Just the neighbors, Charlotte mumbled, lowering her eyes. They're asking for Brianna. The man frowned, and his eyes lit up with cold fire. What do you want with her? Nothing, Deborah improvised hastily, feeling the atmosphere growing tense. We haven't seen her in a while, so we thought we'd drop in. We haven't seen her, and we don't need to, the man said. Brianna is very busy right now. She doesn't like to be disturbed for nothing. Go on, be quiet. But Charlotte tried to take a chance, but he cut her off at the half word. Charles had already taken a step forward, as if to push the uninvited guests out of the door. Deborah drew back involuntarily, but Oliver did not budge. Who the hell do you think you are? He asked, looking the man straight in the eye. And why do you get to decide who we talk to and who we don't? I'm Charles, Charlotte's husband, the man answered, trying to keep his irritation in check. And you, I take it, are the annoying neighbors. Neighbors are neighbors, Oliver said nonchalantly. But we have connections with the police, so I wouldn't advise you, Charles, to be rude to us, much less withhold information. When Charles heard the word police, he flinched. Something akin to fear flashed in his eyes. What have the police got to do with it? He asked. Oliver grimaced. I'm actually a former police officer. Now I'm just a concerned citizen who wants to help his neighbor. So I wouldn't advise you to run away from us. Just tell us what's going on. Where's Brianna? Charles' face went white as a sheet. He looked at Oliver strangely, and then he ran with surprising speed for his age. Without looking back, he sprinted out onto the porch and disappeared around the corner of the house. Stop, Oliver shouted. But it was too late. He turned to the stunned Charlotte. Speak quickly. What's going on here? Where's Brianna, and who's that guy?" The woman was silent, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Oscar, who had been silently watching the drama unfolding before his eyes, couldn't take it anymore. "Come on, say something. What did you do to Brianna?" The boy's words seemed to bring Charlotte back to life. A few minutes later, a car with blinkers was parked outside the house. Oliver briefly outlined the situation to the police officers. They, having assessed the situation and the woman's strange behavior, decided to detain Charlotte until all the circumstances were clarified. "But I'm innocent," she shouted, trying to break free from the police officer's grasp. "Then explain all this at the station," he calmly replied, taking her to the car. "And now, please come with us." Oscar, pale and silent, stood next to Oliver, watching. He still couldn't believe that these people were criminals. "It's too early to draw conclusions," Oliver said, putting his hand on the boy's shoulder. "But it's obvious that something is going on here." The interrogation of Charlotte and Charles, who had been arrested the same day, lasted several hours. Vincent, too, was caught, for he was in town with his mistress that day, and had not, of course, gone on any business trip. At first they denied it, saying that they knew nothing of Brianna's illness, and that it was all a misunderstanding. But under the pressure of irrefutable evidence presented by the investigator, their version began to crumble. Thus it turned out that in fact they are not related. Charlotte and Charles were swindlers, who a few years ago skillfully pulled off a scam with documents, pretending to be the relatives of the heiress of a huge fortune, Brianna. Their aim was simple and cynical: to appropriate all her wealth for themselves. To Brianna's surprise, Vincent was also a con man. He had deliberately conspired with Charlotte and Charles, promising them a share of the inheritance if they agreed to play the role of his wealthy foreign parents. But the family realized they could do without Vincent after all. Secretly from him prepared false documents. Allegedly they are distant relatives of Brianna. And so, without waiting for the wedding of young people, began to implement their own plan to poison her and further inheritance. "Oliver, you are a genius," exclaimed Oscar when he was told about the discovery of the crime and the release of the prisoner. "I knew you would solve this case." Oliver smiled. "It wasn't me and Deborah who solved the case, Oscar, it was the police. I only helped them, gave them a little direction. But if it hadn't been for you, who knows how it would have turned out." The boy continued to marvel. Oliver stroked his head. "The main thing was that Brianna was safe now, and evil, as we know, is always punished." And he was right about that. Charlotte and Charles and their accomplice Vincent had been sentenced to long prison terms for fraud, extortion, and attempted poisoning. Brianna could finally breathe easy. She also decided to personally thank her saviors. "Oscar, my hero." Brianna crouched down next to the boy and wrapped him in her arms. "If not for you, who knows what would have happened to me?" Oscar, blushing with embarrassment, awkwardly stroked her hand. "Come on, Aunt Brianna," he muttered. It was Oliver. He's smart. He knew right away that these people were. Oscar couldn't find the right word. "Scammers," Deborah said as she entered the room. She was carrying a tray full of pies. "Crooks, scoundrels. They wanted to make a profit at someone else's expense. Otherwise they'd have put poison in your food. It's a good thing you're alive." Brianna smiled gratefully. After her treatment in the hospital, she often visited Deborah in her cozy little house. Deborah had given her a motherly care, and she had been grateful for her participation, exhausted by the excitement she had experienced. "Sit down at the table, my dears." Deborah invited her affectionately, setting the cups with fragrant herbal drink on the table. "I baked your favorite cabbage pies." "Deborah, you are magic." Brianna inhaled the warm aroma of the baked goods with pleasure. "Your pies are a miracle." "Eat, eat, my dear," she said thoughtfully. "You need your strength. After all you've been through, it's good that everything turned out so well. You were almost sent to the grave." Brianna shuddered, remembering the horror she'd experienced. Vincent, the deceitful deceiver who had played the role of a loving man, had turned out to be a common Alfonso, determined to get his hands on her wealth. And what she thought were their relatives, Charlotte and Charles, were just his accomplices. "Brianna, what are you going to do now?" Oliver asked, looking at the girl carefully over his glasses. He had practically moved in with her and Deborah, thinking of her as his lover. I don't know, Brianna sighed. There were so many plans, so many hopes. Now don't lose heart, daughter. Life goes on. The main thing is that you are alive and well. The rest will come, the older man said encouragingly. You know, Oliver, I owe a lot to you, and Oscar, Sandra said with feeling. Don't say that, he frowned. We were just in the right place at the right time. No, Oliver, you saved my life. And Oscar is a real hero, too. Brianna looked at the boy fondly. At that moment, an idea was brewing in her soul that seemed more and more appealing by the minute. You know what? Brianna said firmly. I want to get custody. Oliver raised his eyebrows in surprise. Deborah gasped. Oscar looked at the adults questioningly, not understanding what they were talking about. Are you serious? Oliver asked cautiously. It's a very important step. Yes, I understand, Brianna said firmly. But I can't do otherwise. Oscar is a wonderful boy, and he deserves a better life. And I can give it to him. Brianna knew that Oscar lived with a stepfather who abused alcohol, and he often had a hard time, and she couldn't help but feel sorry for him. But what about it? Deborah started to say, but Brianna stopped her with a gesture. I've made up my mind, she said calmly but firmly. I've hired lawyers, and all the documents will be in order. And Oscar will live with me. I'll give him a good education. I'll surround him with care and love. He'll be like a son to me. Oscar, who had been silently listening to the conversation, suddenly ran up to Brianna and hugged her tightly. Thank you, Aunt Brianna, he whispered. You are so kind. Brianna stroked him. In that moment, she was overwhelmed with tenderness for this sweet, touching child. And she also knew that this brave act would save the boy from a hard fate, give him a happy childhood, and perhaps someday he would even call her mom. A month flew by like a day. Brianna worked tirelessly on the guardianship proceedings. Oliver, who had useful connections in the legal field, was a great help to her. Finally, all the formalities were settled and Oscar was officially living with Brianna. The boy blossomed. Before his eyes, joy and carefree spirits settled in his soul. He gladly moved to a new school, where he made good friends. It seemed that all hardships were in the past. Leasing and just transformed, Deborah admired as she watched Brianna helping the boy with his lessons. He's changed so much. He's cheerful. He's so outgoing. Yes, he's wonderful. He just needed love and care, Brianna replied, affectionately taming the unruly curls on Oscar's head. Well, he had a hard time with that. Deborah began, but Oliver coughed delicately, reminding her not to bring up the past. By the way, Brianna, Deborah and I would like to tell you some happy news, he said solemnly, looking fondly at his beloved. Yes, we have decided to legalize our relationship, Deborah added, smiling radiantly. Really? Brianna exclaimed. What a great couple you are. I'm so happy for you. Yes, we've decided to have a small wedding. Just for the closest people, Oliver continued. We want to invite you, Oscar and my Henry, Deborah interrupted. You know Paul. We haven't spoken in years, but recently he called me and apologized for his behavior. He said he was sorry he hadn't been there for me after my husband died. And you decided to forgive him? Brianna asked. Of course, he's my son. Besides, Henry isn't evil at all. He's just a difficult character, very proud. Well, Brianna smiled. I'm happy for you. Deborah and Oliver's wedding was scheduled for the end of August. Brianna was happy to help with the preparations. She ordered a beautiful gown of soft blue for the bride and an elegant hat to match. Deborah looked simply charming in it. On the appointed day, only the closest people gathered at the registry office. Brianna and Oscar, of course, were among the guests of honor. When the bride and groom recited their vows of fidelity, Brianna had tears of emotion in her eyes. How great is this, she thought. Their love had overcome all adversity and given them a second chance at happiness. Deborah's son Henry came to the wedding. Brianna immediately noticed this man with a smart, intelligent face. Brianna, I'd like you to meet him. This is my son, Henry." Deborah proudly introduced him. "Nice to meet you," Brianna smiled, extending her hand. "Likewise," Brianna, Henry replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Mom has told me a lot about you." Brianna and Henry talked all evening, not noticing anyone else around them. It turned out they had a lot to discuss. Henry worked as a surgeon at a clinic in a neighboring town. He was also divorced, raising a daughter on his own. Brianna talked about her life, about her work, about adopting Oscar. "You're a very brave woman," Henry said respectfully when she finished her story. "Not everyone would raise a son who wasn't their own." "I just couldn't do otherwise," Brianna shrugged. "Oscar is very dear to me." The 6 months since the wedding had passed quickly. Brianna warmly remembered that day, full of sincere joy and bright hope. But the main gift of fate was meeting Henry. Their relationship developed rapidly but harmoniously. Henry often came to town to visit his mother, and every time he found time for Brianna and Oscar. The boy just loved Uncle Henry, who could build a whole city out of a construction kit and tell a fascinating story about distant planets. Brianna watched them with happy eyes, realizing that her heart had longed for the true love of a family. It seemed to have found its home. Henry was the man she had dreamed of. Dependable, smart, caring, with a wonderful sense of humor and boundless tenderness in his eyes. One evening, strolling through the park, Henry stopped and, taking her hand, looked seriously into her eyes. "Brianna, I've been meaning to tell you for a long time. You're very dear to me," he said. "You are so kind, intelligent, sympathetic, beautiful. You created a cozy place for Oscar. I am sure that you can create the same cozy, warm world for you and me. Will you marry me?" She couldn't believe her ears, staring wide-eyed. A happy tear rolled down her cheek. "Henry, are you serious?" Brianna whispered, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Absolutely." Henry smiled, gently wiping the tears from her cheek. "I love you, and I want us to be together forever." "I agree," Brianna whispered, and a happy smile lit up her face. They embraced, and the world around them ceased to exist. There was only them, their love, and the quiet happiness pouring from the sky in the warm summer rain. They decided not to postpone the wedding. The wedding was held modestly, in the circle of the closest people. Deborah couldn't be happy with her son and his chosen one. "Brianna, you are a real treasure," she said, embracing her bride. "I'm so glad Henry found you. You are such a beautiful couple." After the wedding, Henry moved in with Brianna. Oscar was over the moon. He had a real daddy now, and a sister. Henry officially adopted the boy, and Oscar was proud to bear his last name. Life took on new colors. Brianna continued to run her business, and Henry went into private practice. In the evenings, when the family gathered around a cup of tea, she and Henry made plans for the future. Looking at her beloved husband, son, and daughter sitting next to her, Brianna thanked fate for the quiet happiness she had been looking for so long, and had finally found.